I thought giving them everything would make them love me. I was wrong. I'm about to tell you the story of how my own family erased me and how I made sure the entire world saw exactly what they did. 3 days before my sister Emma's wedding, the wedding I paid $80,000 for, my father sent me 6 words that shattered my world. The wedding's canceled. We'll handle it. I believed him. God help me, I actually believed him. Then Facebook showed me the truth. White sand beaches, Maldives sunset. My sister in a $4,000 dress I'd paid for. My parents raising champagne glasses filled with my money, and standing beside Emma in the role that should have been mine. A stranger. They hadn't just uninvited me, they'd replaced me. $80,000, 6 months of planning, a lifetime of being the difficult daughter who was never quite good enough. And they spent it all while pretending the wedding didn't exist. But here's what my parents didn't know: I'm a financial analyst. I know how to find things, I know how to build a case, and I know exactly how to make sure that when someone steals from you, publicly humiliates you, and erases you from your own family, the whole world gets to watch them pay for it. What I did next cost them everything: their reputation, their business, their home, and their precious, perfect image. Stick with me, because this story has more twists than they saw coming, and an ending that proved once and for all you don't erase a woman like me. You just make her unstoppable. This is the story of how my sister's wedding destroyed my family and built my legacy. My name is Allison Pierce. I'm 36 years old, a senior financial analyst at Henderson & Associates, and by every measurable standard, I've built a successful life. I own my condo outright. I have a retirement account that would make most financial advisors nod approvingly, and I've climbed the corporate ladder through nothing but discipline and competence. But success, I've learned, doesn't translate to being seen by the people who matter most. The pattern revealed itself early, though I didn't have the language for it until I was much older. I was the responsible one, the capable one, the daughter who could be counted on to handle things without complaint or drama. My parents, Robert and Patricia Pierce, praised me the way you might praise a reliable appliance. Functional. Dependable. Not particularly exciting, but gets the job done. My father ran a small marketing consultancy that never quite took off the way he'd imagined, and my mother devoted herself to managing the household, and more specifically, managing appearances. They were the kind of people who cared deeply about what the neighbors thought, what the church community whispered, what their friends believed about the Pierce family's standing in the world. And then there was Emma. 8 years younger than me, Emma arrived like a beam of sunlight into our family, or at least that's how my parents treated her entrance into the world. She was the pretty one, the sweet one, the child who could do no wrong. While I was bookish and serious, Emma was bubbly and charming. While I earned straight A's through grueling study sessions, Emma scraped by with C's and was told she was creative and free-spirited. At 28 now, she works as a part-time yoga instructor living in a studio apartment that my parents help subsidize because, as my father often says, they're investing in Emma's future until she finds herself. The inequality wasn't always obvious. It lived in the small moments, the accumulated weight of 1,000 tiny dismissals. I remember my 12th birthday with painful clarity. My mother bought a sheet cake from the grocery store bakery, the kind with the plasticky frosting that tastes more like chemicals than sugar. We ate it at the kitchen table, just the 4 of us, and my father gave me a $20 bill in a card. 3 weeks later, I watched my mother plan Emma's 10th birthday party with the intensity of a military campaign. She rented out the community center, hired a woman to dress up as a Disney princess, and invited 30 children I'd never seen before. The photo album from that day is thick with pictures of Emma in a pink dress surrounded by balloons, and presents her face glowing with the kind of joy that comes from being absolutely certain you are loved. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that Emma was younger, that she needed more attention, that my parents were just trying to make sure she felt special. I became very good at making excuses for them. The pattern continued into adulthood, sharpening rather than softening with time. Last Thanksgiving stands out as a particularly brutal example. I'd just been promoted to senior analyst, a position I'd worked toward for 3 years. It came with a significant raise and would set me up perfectly for a director role within 2 years. I mentioned it to my parents when I arrived at their house, arms full of the expensive wine I'd brought and the homemade cranberry sauce I'd spent 2 hours preparing that morning. My mother said, "Oh, that's nice, honey," without looking up from the turkey she was basting. My father nodded absently and said, "Good for you, Allie. You always were a hard worker." And that was it. The entirety of their response to a milestone I'd been building toward for years. Then Emma arrived with her new boyfriend, an aspiring musician named Josh, who wore a leather jacket indoors and had opinions about everything. For the next 2 hours, conversation revolved entirely around him. His band, his music, his philosophy on life, his thoughts on the political climate. My parents hung on every word. My mother kept saying how interesting and artistic he seemed. My father asked thoughtful questions about the music industry. Emma glowed beside him, basking in the reflected attention. I sat at the end of the table, cutting my turkey into smaller and smaller pieces, wondering what it would take for them to look at me the way they looked at her. What it would take to matter. The phone calls from my parents follow a predictable pattern. They contact me when they need something. A loan because business has been slow. Help understanding their taxes. Advice on a financial decision. I always say yes. I always help. Because somewhere deep inside, I still believe that if I'm useful enough, generous enough, selfless enough, they'll finally see me as more than just the capable daughter. They'll see me as worthy of the kind of uncomplicated love they shower on Emma without her having to earn it at all. My mother has a way of making comparisons that she frames as helpful observations. "Why can't you be more approachable like your sister?" She asked me once at a family dinner when I declined to stay late because I had work the next morning. "Emma would never talk back like that," she said another time when I pointed out that I couldn't loan my father $5,000 without some kind of repayment plan. The message was always clear: Emma was the daughter they wanted. I was the daughter they tolerated. I've internalized their message so completely that I police myself now. I pick up the check at family dinners without being asked. I never mention when I'm struggling or need support. I show up to every birthday, every holiday, every family obligation with a smile and a gift and the performance of a daughter who is perfectly fine with being invisible. Because I keep thinking that if I just try harder, if I just prove myself more thoroughly, they'll love me the way they love her. They love me in their own way, I tell myself on the drives home from their house, gripping the steering wheel too tight. I just need to prove I'm worth it. When Emma got engaged, I thought finally a chance for our family to be whole. I was so wrong. 2 weeks after Emma announced her engagement to Josh at Sunday brunch, my parents invited me over for what they called a family dinner. I should have known something was coming. They only used the phrase family dinner when they needed something as opposed to the casual, "why don't you come by" invitations that required nothing from me but my presence. I arrived with a bottle of wine and the vague sense of dread that had become my baseline emotion around my family. We made it through the appetizers and most of the main course before my father cleared his throat in that particular way that signaled an uncomfortable topic was approaching. My mother's hands fluttered nervously with her napkin. Emma sat very still, her eyes fixed on her plate. Then my father said, "We've been talking about the wedding, and well, finances are a bit tight right now with the business and everything." The implication hung in the air like smoke. They were going to ask me for money. Again. But before my father could continue his careful preamble, something inside me shifted. I saw an opportunity, a chance to finally be more than just the ATM daughter. A chance to be essential, not just useful. "I want to pay for the wedding," I heard myself say, "the whole thing, as my gift to Emma." The silence that followed felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. My mother's eyes went wide. Emma's fork clattered against her plate. My father leaned back in his chair and I watched something move across his face that I couldn't quite read. Then my mother's eyes filled with tears and she pressed her hand to her chest. "Oh, honey, we couldn't possibly ask you to do that. It's too much." But my father, always the pragmatist, always the one who knew how to accept an opportunity when it presented itself, leaned forward. "But if you're sure, Allison, if you really mean it, it would mean the world to Emma. And to us. It would let us give her the wedding she deserves." Emma stood up and came around the table, pulling me into a hug that smelled like her vanilla perfume and felt like everything I'd been starving for. "Thank you. Thank you," she whispered against my shoulder, and I felt her tears on my neck. "You're the best sister anyone could ask for." I drove home that night with the windows down, even though it was cold, because I needed to feel something real against my skin to prove the moment had actually happened. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt light. I felt like I mattered. I felt like I'd finally found the key to the door that had been locked against me my whole life. The money was substantial, yes, but I had it. I'd been careful, disciplined, saving for a future that had always felt vaguely theoretical. Now I had a purpose for those savings. I had a way to write myself into the center of my family's story instead of hovering at the margins. Over the next 6 months, I threw myself into wedding planning with an intensity that surprised even me. I met with Diane, the wedding planner. Emma had chosen every 2 weeks. Diane had an office that smelled like lavender and was decorated with photos of happy couples, and she treated me with a deference that felt intoxicating. I was the one writing the checks after all, the one making decisions. I approved the venue, a gorgeous estate overlooking the water, for $15,000. I reviewed photographer portfolios until I found the perfect one and wrote a check for $8,000. The flowers alone cost $6,000, but when I saw Emma's face light up at the sample arrangements, it felt worth every penny. The catering was the biggest expense, $35,000 for 150 guests, but I wanted Emma to have everything she'd ever dreamed of. My financial advisor, a practical woman named Susan who'd been managing my investments for 5 years, insisted on one thing. "Get it in writing," she told me over coffee one afternoon when I'd mentioned the wedding expenses. "I know it's family, but money and family are a dangerous combination. Just a simple agreement that if the wedding is canceled, the funds are returned." I felt almost embarrassed bringing it up to my father, but I did it anyway, framing it as something Susan required, a formality for my records. He laughed, an easy sound that made me feel silly for even asking. "Just a formality between family," he said as he signed the single-page document I'd printed out. His signature was loose and confident, the signature of a man who had no doubt about anything. I made a copy, tucked it into my file cabinet at home, and never imagined I'd need to look at it again. But the planning wasn't just about money. I attended dress fittings, sitting on those uncomfortable boutique chairs while Emma modeled gown after gown. I helped her address invitations one Saturday afternoon, my hand cramping from writing out hundreds of addresses in the calligraphy I'd taught myself from YouTube videos. I built the wedding website, spending hours selecting the perfect photos and writing the love story in a way that made even me tear up a little. Emma said things that I held on to like precious stones. "I don't know what I'd do without you, sis. You're making this so easy for me. I'm so lucky to have you." My mother even called me one evening, an unprecedented event since she usually only texted. "You're being so generous," she said, her voice warm in a way I'd rarely heard directed at me. "Emma is so blessed to have a sister like you." I let myself believe it. I let myself imagine the wedding day, standing beside Emma in whatever dress she chose for me, watching her marry Josh under the flower arbor I'd paid for. I imagined my father's speech at the reception, where he'd surely mention my generosity, my love for my sister, the way I'd made all of this possible. I imagined people seeing me differently, seeing me as more than just the serious one, the responsible one. They'd see me as the loving sister who'd given her sibling the wedding of her dreams. For the first time in my life, I'd be celebrated not for what I achieved through hard work, but for what I gave through love. That $80,000 wasn't just money. It was the price of my erasure. 3 days before Emma's wedding, I was sitting at my desk reviewing quarterly reports when my phone lit up with a call from a number I recognized immediately. Diane, the wedding planner. I smiled as I answered, expecting some last-minute detail about the seating chart or a question about the timeline for the reception. Instead, her voice came through tight and uncomfortable, like someone forcing themselves to deliver bad news. "Ms. Pierce, I'm calling because I wanted you to hear this from me directly." She paused, and in that pause I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Your family has requested that we remove your name from the guest list, but they've asked us to retain all payments and proceed with the event as planned." I actually laughed. The sound came out sharp and disbelieving, echoing strangely in my quiet office. "I'm sorry, what? There must be some kind of mistake. I'm not just a guest, I'm paying for the wedding." "I know," Diane said, and her voice dropped lower, almost to a whisper. "Ms. Pierce, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've seen family drama, I've seen disputes over money, I've seen all kinds of situations. But what they're asking me to do, this isn't right. I thought you should know." My hands started shaking. I set down my pen carefully, deliberately, focusing on that small action, because everything else suddenly felt like it was tilting sideways. "When did they ask you to do this?" "Yesterday. Your mother called and said there had been a change in the family situation and you would no longer be attending. She was very firm about it. I pushed back. I told her this was highly unusual given your financial involvement, but she insisted." After I hung up, I sat frozen for what might have been 30 seconds or 30 minutes. Then my body took over where my mind couldn't, and I grabbed my phone with trembling fingers. I called Emma first. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Her cheerful voice told me to leave a message and she'd get back to me as soon as she could. I called again immediately. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. I tried my mother next. The phone rang, and I pictured it sitting on her kitchen counter, her looking at the screen and watching my name appear, making the choice not to answer. I called my father. The call connected for half a ring and then cut off abruptly. Declined. He'd actively rejected my call. My fingers moved across the screen, typing out a text to the family group chat we'd had for years. "Is everything okay? Diane just called me. I'm worried. Please call me back." I watched the message deliver. I watched the 3 dots appear that meant someone was typing. Then they disappeared. No response came. I tried Emma's fiancé, Josh, thinking maybe he didn't know what was happening. Maybe he could explain. Straight to voicemail. I sent him a text. No reply. I opened my email and composed a message to my mother, keeping my tone calm and concerned, asking if there was an emergency, if someone was sick, if I'd done something wrong that we could talk about. I hit send and watched it leave my outbox, sailing into a silence that felt increasingly hostile. For 3 hours, I sat in my office as the sun moved across the sky outside my window, casting long shadows across my desk. I couldn't focus on work. I couldn't think about anything except my phone, willing it to ring, checking it every few minutes to make sure I hadn't somehow missed a call or text. My mind spun through possibilities like a wheel that wouldn't stop turning. Maybe someone had died and they were too distraught to talk. Maybe there was a family emergency I didn't know about. Maybe I'd said something at the last family dinner that had offended someone and I just couldn't remember what it was. I mentally reviewed every conversation I'd had with each of them over the past month, searching for the moment I'd crossed some invisible line. At 6:47 in the evening, my phone finally buzzed with a text from my father. I grabbed it so quickly I nearly dropped it. 6 words appeared on the screen. No punctuation, no explanation, no softness. "The wedding's canceled, we'll handle it." I read it once, twice, 10 times. 20 times. The words didn't change. There was no apology. No, "we'll explain when things calm down." No acknowledgement of the $80,000 I'd spent, or the 6 months I'd devoted to planning. Just a flat statement and a dismissal. I called him back immediately. The call wouldn't go through. I tried my mother. Same thing. Emma. Same. They'd blocked me. All of them had blocked my number. I don't remember deciding to drive to their house. I just found myself in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white, taking the familiar turns through their neighborhood on autopilot. When I pulled up to the curb outside the house I'd grown up in, every light was on. I could see movement through the sheer curtains in the living room. Someone was home. Multiple people were home. I walked up to the front door and knocked. No answer. I knocked again harder. Nothing. I pressed the doorbell, hearing the chime echo inside. Silence. I stood there for 5 minutes, knocking and ringing, my heart pounding, my breath coming faster. A car drove past slowly. I knocked again. Finally, I walked back to my car and sat in the driver's seat, staring at the house. I couldn't leave. I couldn't make myself turn the key and drive away. An hour passed. The sky darkened. Lights in the house went off one by one. Mrs. Chen from next door, a woman I'd known since I was 8 years old, came out to walk her dog. She saw me sitting there. Our eyes met through the windshield. She looked away quickly and hurried past, tugging her dog along. That's when I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and opened the browser. I typed in the name of the venue, Ocean View Estate. Their website loaded, and I clicked on the events calendar. Then I checked the venue's website. The wedding wasn't canceled at all. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind cycling through the same thoughts over and over until they wore grooves into my consciousness. At 2 a.m, I gave up on sleep entirely and opened my laptop, the blue light harsh in my dark bedroom. My fingers moved almost without conscious thought, typing Ocean View Estate into the search bar. The venue's website loaded with its elegant script and photos of happy couples posed against sunset backdrops. I clicked on the events calendar, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. And there it was, listed in neat black text: Pierce Morrison Wedding, Saturday, June 18th, private event, active. I stared at that single word. Active. Not canceled, not postponed. Active. I refreshed the page, half expecting it to change, to reveal itself as some kind of technical glitch. The page reloaded. The listing remained. Pierce Morrison Wedding. Active. I refreshed again. Again. My finger pressing the key over and over, like maybe the repetition would somehow alter reality. It didn't. When the sun finally came up, I was still sitting there, my laptop burning hot on my thighs, my eyes dry and aching. I waited until 9 o'clock, when I knew the venue's office would open, and I called. My voice came out steadier than I felt as I introduced myself as Jennifer Matthews, a bride-to-be interested in booking a summer wedding. "Of course," the receptionist said brightly. "What date were you thinking?" "June 18th, I said. "This Saturday, actually. I know it's last minute, but—" "Oh, I'm so sorry," she interrupted, her voice warm with genuine apology. "That weekend is completely booked. We have the Pierce wedding. It's a large event, 150 guests. Beautiful ceremony planned overlooking the water." My hand started shaking so violently I nearly dropped the phone. "I see. Thank you for your time." I hung up before she could say anything else. The lie wasn't a miscommunication. It wasn't a mistake or a moment of panic. It was deliberate, calculated. They had looked me in the eye, taken my money, and planned my removal with the same careful attention they'd given to selecting centerpieces and choosing a menu. I pulled out the file folder I kept in my desk drawer, the one where I'd meticulously organized every receipt, every contract, every confirmation email related to the wedding. My hands were shaking so badly now that papers slipped from my fingers and scattered across my desk. I picked them up one by one, reading details I'd practically memorized. Every single payment confirmation had my name on it. Allison Pierce. My credit card number partially obscured for security. My email address as the contact. My signature on the contracts. I opened my laptop again and logged into my bank account, scrolling back through 6 months of transactions. $15,000 to Ocean View Estate. $8,000 to Crystal Moments Photography, $6,000 to Bella Flora Design, $35,000 to Gourmet Affairs Catering, smaller amounts for invitations for the wedding website hosting for the rehearsal dinner deposit. Every single transaction had cleared. Every single penny had left my account and gone to vendors who were even now preparing for a wedding I would not attend. My stomach lurched, and I barely made it to the bathroom before I was sick. I knelt on the cold tile floor, heaving until there was nothing left my body trying to purge something that couldn't be vomited away. When I finally stood up, my legs were weak, and my reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger. Pale, hollow-eyed, gutted. I forced myself back to my desk and started making calls. The photographer first, because I'd spent hours with him discussing angles and lighting and the specific shots Emma wanted. He answered on the second ring, his voice cheerful. "Ms. Pierce, I was just going through my equipment checklist. Everything's set for Saturday. I'm really looking forward to capturing Emma's special day." "Thank you," I managed to say. "I just wanted to confirm you have everything you need." "Absolutely. It's going to be beautiful. Your sister's bouquet alone is going to make for stunning photos." I called the florist next. A woman named Maria answered, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Oh, Ms. Pierce, perfect timing. I wanted to let you know your sister's bouquet is going to be absolutely stunning. The peonies came in this morning, and they're exactly the shade of blush pink she wanted. You made an excellent choice." The caterer was equally enthusiastic. "Final headcount is confirmed at 150 guests. The filet and salmon options you selected are going to be incredible. We're so excited to be part of this celebration." Everyone knew the wedding was happening. Everyone had their orders and their plans and their excitement. Everyone except the person who had paid for all of it. Everyone except me. I hung up from the last call and sat very still, trying to understand the physical sensation overtaking my body. It felt like reality itself was fracturing, like the solid ground I'd been standing on had revealed itself to be paper-thin ice over dark water. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped bands around my ribs and was pulling them tighter and tighter. I couldn't seem to get a full breath. Then I remembered the guest list. I'd helped Emma create it months ago, sitting at her kitchen table with a bottle of wine and a notebook, debating whether to invite certain cousins or if 150 people was already too many. I'd added my own name to the list. Guest 47, Allison Pierce. +1, though I'd planned to go alone. I opened my email and typed a message to Diane, keeping it simple. "Hi, Diane. Could you please send me the current guest list? I want to make sure I haven't missed anyone." I hit send before I could overthink it. Her response came back within 20 minutes. The subject line read, "Updated guest list. So sorry about everything." The attachment was a spreadsheet. I opened it with fingers that felt numb. I scrolled down to guest 47, where my name should have been. Where my name had been just a few weeks ago when I'd last reviewed the list with Diane. But my name wasn't there anymore. Guest 47 was listed as Bethany Clark, Patricia's best friend's daughter, a woman I'd met maybe twice in my entire life, a woman who had done nothing, contributed nothing, meant nothing to Emma's life or this wedding. But she would sit in my seat. She would eat the food I'd paid for drink, the wine I'd selected, watch my sister get married in the venue I'd secured. They hadn't just uninvited me. They had erased me and replaced me like I was a piece of furniture that didn't match the decor. And they'd done it weeks ago, maybe months ago, while I was still writing checks and attending planning meetings and believing I was finally part of something. While I was imagining my father's speech thanking me, while I was picturing myself standing beside Emma, while I was foolish enough to think that $80,000 could buy me a place in my own family. The cruelty wasn't accidental. It wasn't a heat-of-the-moment decision or a panicked response to some imagined slight. It was architectural, planned, executed with the same careful precision they'd used to select the color scheme and the dinner menu. They had built my exclusion brick by brick while smiling to my face. 2 days later, Facebook showed me what $80,000 of betrayal looks like. By Sunday evening, I hadn't left my couch in nearly 48 hours. I was still wearing the same pajamas I'd put on Friday night, and I'd eaten nothing but half a sleeve of crackers because the thought of real food made my stomach turn. The wedding had happened the day before, Saturday, June 18th. While I'd been lying here in my darkened living room with the curtains drawn, my sister had gotten married on a beach in the Maldives with my money. My phone sat on the coffee table where I'd been staring at it on and off all weekend, willing it to ring, hoping for some explanation that would make this make sense. When it finally buzzed, the notification that lit up the screen felt like a physical blow. Emma Morrison shared a video, "Your sister's wedding day." Facebook's algorithm, that cold mathematical formula designed to connect people and share joyful moments, had become an instrument of torture. The notification sat there innocent and bright, inviting me to celebrate. My finger hovered over the screen. Some rational part of my brain, the part that still functioned despite everything, knew I shouldn't watch it. Knew it would only make things worse. Knew I should delete the app, throw my phone across the room, do anything except click on that video. I clicked anyway. The video opened with a sweeping aerial shot of crystalline turquoise water and white sand so pristine it looked like powdered sugar. The Maldives. Not the local venue I'd booked, not Ocean View Estate overlooking the water in our home state. They'd taken my money and upgraded to a destination wedding without telling me. Piano music swelled over the image as the camera panned down to show a simple bamboo arch decorated with white flowers. And there was Emma walking barefoot across the sand in a flowing dress I'd never seen before. Not the dress from the boutique fittings I'd attended. A different dress. A $4,000 dress I'd apparently paid for without knowing it existed. The video was beautifully edited. The photographer I'd hired, the one I'd spent 2 hours interviewing to make sure he understood Emma's vision, had done exceptional work. Emma looked radiant, her hair loose and wavy in the ocean breeze. Ryan stood at the altar, crying, actually crying as she approached. The officiant spoke words I couldn't hear over the music. They exchanged rings. They kissed. 150 guests erupted in applause, all of them strangers to me, except for my parents, who I spotted in the front row. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, the one that had belonged to her grandmother. My father stood and raised a champagne glass, and the camera zoomed in on his face. He looked happy, genuinely, radiantly happy, in a way I'd rarely seen. His voice came through clearly as the background music faded. "To my beautiful daughters," he said, and my heart stopped beating. For one insane moment, I thought he was going to acknowledge me, to explain my absence, to say something that would make this video evidence of a misunderstanding rather than a betrayal. The camera panned following his gesture, and I saw Emma standing with her arm around a young woman I barely recognized. Bethany Clark, Patricia's best friend's daughter, a woman I'd met exactly twice in my life, once at a Christmas party years ago, and once at a family barbecue where we'd exchanged maybe 5 sentences total. She was wearing a dress in the same blush pink color scheme I'd helped Emma select, standing in the position where I should have been. Emma pulled Bethany into a hug, both of them laughing, and spoke into the microphone someone handed her. "To my sisters, blood and chosen, who've always been there for me." Her voice broke with emotion. Real emotion. "I'm so blessed to have you in my life." The guests applauded again. The video cut to reception footage. Tables decorated with the centerpieces I'd approved, the cake I'd tasted, 3 different samples of before, selecting people dancing to the playlist I'd spent hours curating with the DJ. The comments were already flooding in below the video. "Beautiful family. So much love in one place. What a blessing to witness this. Your parents must be so proud." Hearts and crying emojis and congratulations piled up, a digital avalanche of celebration. I scrolled through every single comment. 47 of them. Not one person asked about me. Not one person said, "Wait, where's Allison?" Not one person seemed to notice that the sister who'd paid for everything, who'd spent 6 months planning every detail, who'd been part of every conversation and every decision, was completely absent. They'd told some story that erased me so thoroughly that my absence didn't even register as strange. I watched the video again, and again, and again. 12 minutes long, and I subjected myself to every second 3 times over cataloging every detail with the precision of my financial analyst brain. The white peonies I'd selected with the florist arranging and rearranging sample bouquets until we got the perfect combination. The 3-tier cake with champagne buttercream that I'd insisted on after the tasting, because Emma's eyes had lit up when she tried it. The string quartet playing during the ceremony, the same musicians I'd found after listening to samples from 6 different groups. The signature cocktail named Sunset Kiss that I'd invented with the bartender mixing and adjusting ratios until it was exactly right. Every single frame was a monument to my love and their contempt. Every smile in that video, every tear, every moment of joy existed because I had built it for them. I had created this perfect day, this beautiful memory, this celebration of love, and they had taken it and removed me from it like I was a stain they needed to edit out. On the 3rd viewing, my stomach finally rebelled. I ran to the bathroom and fell to my knees in front of the toilet, retching violently, even though there was almost nothing in me to bring up. My body heaved anyway, trying to expel something that couldn't be vomited away, trying to purge a pain that lived too deep to reach. When the spasms finally stopped, I couldn't find the strength to get up. I lay down on the cold tile floor, my cheek pressed against the bathroom rug, and from the living room, I could hear my phone still playing the video on repeat, because I'd forgotten to stop it. The piano music drifted down the hallway, punctuated by my father's voice saying, "My beautiful daughters," over and over like a chorus designed specifically to break me. Something inside me that had been bending and bending under the weight of this betrayal finally snapped. Not broke, snapped, like a bone that fractures cleanly with a sound you can hear. The part of me that had spent 36 years hoping they would love me, that had made excuses for every slight and dismissal that had believed. If I just tried harder and gave more and asked for less, they would finally see me as worthy. That part died on my bathroom floor, while my sister's wedding video played in the other room. What rose in its place was something I didn't recognize at first, something harder than hope, clearer than confusion, angrier than I'd ever allowed myself to be. It felt like waking up after years of sleep, like vision sharpening after a lifetime of blur. They had spent 6 months planning this. 6 months smiling at me, accepting my checks, including me in meetings, all while knowing they were going to cut me out at the end. This wasn't impulse or mistake. This was premeditated erasure. They didn't just take my money. They erased me from the family I built them. Monday morning, I called my office and told them I had the flu. It was the first sick day I'd taken in 8 years of working at Henderson & Associates. My boss, concerned by how unlike me this was, told me to take the whole week if I needed it. I said I'd be back in a few days. I wasn't. I didn't shower. I didn't change out of my pajamas. I moved from the bed to the couch and back again. But that was the extent of my physical activity. My phone rang occasionally, but the only name that appeared on the screen was Margaret Chen, my colleague and mentor from work. I didn't answer. I couldn't imagine forming words, couldn't imagine pretending to be functional, when everything inside me felt like it had been torn apart and rearranged in the wrong order. I spent hours lying in bed staring at the ceiling fan, watching the blades turn in their endless rotation, and something strange began happening in my mind. Memories I'd filed away as neutral or even positive started surfacing, but now I was seeing them through different eyes. Every moment I'd interpreted as love or family bonding revealed itself as something else entirely, when held up to the light of what they'd just done to me. The time my mother called me so responsible when I was 14, praising me for taking care of Emma while they went on a weekend trip. At the time, I'd glowed with pride. Now I heard what she'd really meant: "You're so useful. You're a built-in babysitter we don't have to pay." The dozens of times they'd said, "Emma needs you," when asking me to help with homework, to drive her places, to cover expenses they should have handled. I'd thought they were teaching me the value of family. Now I understood: we need your labor, your time, your money. I wasn't sad anymore. Sadness implied something had been lost, but you can't lose what you never really had. What I was doing felt more like archaeology, excavating layer after layer of my life, and discovering that the foundation I'd thought I was standing on had never been solid at all. Every interaction, every family dinner, every holiday had been built on a lie I'd been too desperate to see. The depth of the manipulation was suffocating. It went back so far, had been so consistent, that I started to wonder if they'd ever seen me as a daughter at all, or just as a resource to be managed. On day 5, someone knocked on my door. I ignored it. The knocking continued, persistent and rhythmic. Then I heard Margaret's voice through the door, firm and unyielding in a way that made it clear she wasn't leaving. "Allison, I know you're in there. I brought soup. Open the door or I'm calling the landlord to do a wellness check." I dragged myself off the couch and opened the door. Margaret took one look at me, and her expression shifted from concern to something harder, more determined. She was 62, a senior partner at our firm who'd been my mentor for the past decade, and she had a way of seeing through pretense that made her both terrifying and invaluable. She walked past me into my apartment without waiting for an invitation, set a container of soup on my kitchen counter, and sat down on my couch like she planned to stay a while. "Talk," she said. So I did. I told her everything: the wedding I'd paid for, the planning meetings and dress fittings, and the careful selection of every detail. The phone call from Diane, the text from my father, the blocked numbers and the unanswered door. The guest list with my name replaced by a stranger. The video of them celebrating in the Maldives, my sister calling someone else her sister while spending my money. I talked for over an hour, and Margaret didn't interrupt once. She just listened with the complete attention she brought to everything she did. When I finally ran out of words, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something I didn't expect. "Good people break differently than bad people. Bad people, when they break, they explode outward. They hurt everyone around them. But good people, we shatter inward. We turn all that pain on ourselves, convince ourselves we deserved it somehow, that we weren't enough. We blame ourselves for other people's cruelty." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "But here's what I learned when my family did something similar to me 20 years ago. You're not broken, Allison. You're breaking free. There's a difference." I felt tears start to form, but she held up her hand. "I'm not done. Breaking free feels like breaking down because you're dismantling all the lies you told yourself to survive. You told yourself they loved you. You told yourself you just needed to try harder. You told yourself their neglect was your fault. Those lies kept you going, but they were also chains. You're not falling apart. You're cutting yourself loose." She reached into her bag and pulled out a leather-bound journal, the expensive kind with thick cream-colored pages. She set it on the coffee table between us. "Write every single thing they did. Every moment, every slight, every betrayal, big and small. Don't write it to forgive them or to make sense of it or to find a way back. Write it to remember. Write it so you never forget why you're done. Write it so when they try to come back, when they try to tell you it wasn't that bad or you're overreacting, you have proof. Not for them, for yourself." After Margaret left, making me promise to eat the soup and to call her the next day, I sat looking at that journal for a long time. My hand shook when I finally picked it up and opened to the first blank page. I wrote the date at the top. Then I started with the wedding, documenting everything I could remember in chronological order. The offer to pay, the signed agreement, the planning sessions, the payments, the phone call, the erasure, But once I started writing, I couldn't stop there. The wedding wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a lifetime of smaller betrayals I'd been trained to excuse. I wrote about my 16th birthday, the one my parents completely forgot because they were planning Emma's 8th birthday party. They'd apologized when I finally mentioned it 3 days later, but the party planning had continued. I wrote about college tuition, how I'd worked 2 jobs and cobbled together scholarships to pay my way, while they took out loans for Emma and called it a family investment in her future. I wrote about the Christmas when I was 23 and gave everyone thoughtful, carefully chosen gifts I'd saved for months to afford, and my parents gave me a $20 gas station gift card they'd clearly bought on the way to dinner. I wrote about the $5,000 my father had borrowed for business expenses 7 years ago, promising to pay me back within 6 months. He'd never repaid a cent, and when I gently asked about it a year later, he'd looked at me like I was being petty for keeping track. I wrote about every family dinner where my accomplishments were mentioned in passing, while Emma's most mundane activities warranted lengthy discussion. I wrote about the way my mother's voice warmed when she talked to Emma and stayed neutral when she talked to me, like she was conserving some limited resource of affection she didn't want to waste on the wrong daughter. I wrote for hours. The sky outside my window went from dark to gray to bright morning light. My hand cramped. My eyes burned. But I kept writing, because once the gates had opened, decades of swallowed pain came flooding out. By the time dawn broke completely, I had 40 pages filled with my cramped handwriting. 40 pages of evidence that the wedding wasn't an aberration. It was simply the largest and most expensive instance of a pattern that had defined my entire relationship with my family. And for the first time in my 36 years, I let myself be angry about it. Not sad, not confused, not wondering what I'd done wrong, just purely, clearly, righteously angry at people who had taken advantage of my love for my entire life. They thought silence meant I was broken. It meant I was preparing. On Monday morning, I showered for the first time in a week, put on my most professional suit, and returned to work. When people asked how I was feeling, I smiled and said the flu had been rough, but I was recovered now. No one except Margaret knew what had actually happened, and I intended to keep it that way. I moved through the office with the same calm competence I'd always projected, answering emails and attending meetings and reviewing financial reports with the focused attention that had earned me my promotion. But inside, I was building a case. I started with what I knew, approaching it the way I would any complex financial analysis at work. During my lunch break, I logged into my bank account and began pulling statements going back 10 years. I created a spreadsheet because that's what I did. That's how my brain organized chaos into something manageable. In one column, I listed every transfer I'd made to my parents, or on their behalf. In another column, I noted what they'd told me the money was for. In a third column, I tracked whether they'd ever repaid me. The numbers told a story I'd been refusing to read. $1,000 here for property taxes they claimed they couldn't cover. $3,000 there for my father's business expenses during a slow season. $1,500 for my mother's dental work. $2,000 for Emma's car insurance when she was between jobs. The total came to $23,000 over 10 years, not including the wedding. $23,000 in loans that were never repaid, that were never even acknowledged as debts. They'd taken my money the way you'd take spare change from a jar, casually and without guilt, because somewhere along the way they'd decided I owed them for the simple fact of my existence. I spent the next several days methodically requesting documentation from every vendor involved in the wedding. As the payer, I had legal right to copies of all contracts and correspondence. The wedding planner sent everything within hours, including email chains that showed my parents specifically requesting my removal from the guest list 2 weeks before the event. The photographer, the florist, the caterer, the venue coordinator, they all complied professionally, probably wondering why I needed copies of contracts for an event that had already happened. I didn't explain. I just saved everything to a password-protected folder on my laptop labeled simply Evidence. I went back through my phone and took screenshots of every text message from my parents, every email, every interaction that might be relevant. I made sure to capture the Facebook video before they thought to make it private, downloading it to 3 separate locations, including cloud storage they couldn't access. The signed agreement from my father, the one that said funds would be returned if the wedding was canceled. I scanned and backed up in multiple formats. I was meticulous, thorough. I approached it with the same precision I brought to analyzing quarterly reports, except this time the numbers represented my life being dismantled. While organizing my financial documents, I found something in my filing cabinet that made my blood run cold. 2 years ago, my father had asked me to co-sign a car loan because his credit wasn't good enough to qualify on his own. He'd promised to make every payment on time, had sworn I'd never have to worry about it, that he just needed my signature as a formality. I'd hesitated, but he'd looked so defeated, and my mother had called to tell me how much it would mean to him, and I'd signed. I pulled up the loan servicer's website and logged in using the account number from my files. The status page loaded, and I stared at the red text. Account delinquent, 90 days past due. 3 months behind on payments. He'd never mentioned it. Never called to explain or apologize or even warn me. I checked my credit score using one of those free monitoring services and watched my stomach drop as the number appeared 80 points lower than it had been 6 months ago. I ordered my full credit report, paying for the comprehensive version that showed every inquiry and account associated with my name. It arrived in my email within minutes, a PDF document that felt like it was burning through my screen. I scrolled through pages of my careful financial history, and then I found it. A business credit card from a bank I'd never used, opened 4 years ago. The balance was maxed at $12,000. The account was in default. And listed under authorized users and references was my name. My father had used me as a reference to open a credit card for his failing business, then defaulted on it, and my name was attached to his debt like a weight I'd been carrying without knowing it existed. This wasn't just about the wedding. This wasn't even just about the pattern of small loans that were never repaid. This was systematic financial abuse that had been going on for years, quietly destroying my credit and my financial standing while I remained completely unaware. I sat at my desk, staring at that credit report, until my vision blurred and something shifted in my understanding of what had been done to me. They hadn't just stolen $80,000 and erased me from a wedding. They'd been stealing from me in ways I couldn't see, damaging my future while I thought I was helping their present. Every time I'd said yes to a loan, every time I'd offered to help, I'd been handing them weapons they used against me without my knowledge. I made an appointment with an attorney, finding one through a referral from Margaret, who specialized in family law and financial fraud. Sarah Chen had an office in a downtown high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. She was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and an efficiency in her movements that I immediately respected. I'd brought 3 folders worth of documentation organized chronologically and by category. She spent 90 minutes reviewing everything I'd brought, occasionally making notes on a legal pad, asking clarifying questions about dates and amounts, and what had been said versus what had been written. When she finally looked up, her expression was serious. "You have multiple legal avenues here," she said, tapping her pen against her notes. "Breach of contract is the most straightforward. You have a signed agreement stating the funds would be returned if the wedding was canceled, and they clearly lied about the cancellation. The credit card situation is fraud, possibly identity theft, depending on exactly how he listed you. The co-signed loan is trickier legally, but combined with everything else, it establishes a pattern of financial exploitation. There's even an argument for what we might call reverse financial abuse, adult children systematically exploiting a family member." She paused and leaned forward, her eyes meeting mine directly. "But here's what I need you to understand before we go any further. Lawsuits take time. They cost money, even though you'd likely recover fees if you win, and they will completely and permanently destroy any remaining relationship with your family. There won't be holiday dinners after this. There won't be reconciliation. Once we file, you're declaring war." I didn't hesitate. There is no remaining relationship. There never was one. How do we proceed? 1 month after the wedding, the first crack in their perfect story appeared. I was working late on a Thursday evening, the office mostly empty except for the cleaning crew making their rounds, when my desk phone buzzed with a call from reception. Our night security guard's voice came through, apologetic and uncertain. "Ms. Pierce, there's a Ryan Morrison here asking to see you. Says it's personal. Should I send him up?" Ryan Morrison, Emma's husband. I hadn't seen him since the engagement party over a year ago, hadn't spoken to him since my unanswered attempts to reach anyone in the days before the wedding. For a moment I considered saying I wasn't available, that he should make an appointment, that whatever he wanted could wait. but curiosity won out over caution. "Send him up." He appeared in my doorway 3 minutes later, looking like he hadn't slept properly in weeks. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion, and there was something in his posture that read as shame. He didn't wait for an invitation, just walked into my office and sat down in the chair across from my desk, like his legs couldn't hold him anymore. "I need to tell you something because I can't live with it anymore," he said without preamble. I set down my pen and waited, my heart beating faster than I wanted it to. 3 weeks ago, Emma's parents asked us for $30,000. They said there was unexpected wedding debt that vendors were threatening collections, that they needed our help to cover shortfalls. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration that looked practiced from repetition. "I thought it was strange because you'd paid for everything, but Patricia was crying and Robert looked panicked, so I started asking specific questions about which vendors and what amounts." He looked at me directly for the first time since sitting down. "That's when your mother broke down and admitted they'd used most of your money to pay off credit card debt and mortgage arrears. She said the actual wedding only cost about $40,000 to put together. They stole the other $40,000, Allison. They took your money and used it to dig themselves out of holes they'd spent years creating." I'd already suspected something like this after discovering the credit card fraud, but hearing it confirmed out loud still felt like a physical blow. $40,000 stolen outright, not even spent on the event they'd claimed to need it for. $40,000 of my savings, my careful planning, my attempt to buy my way into being loved, and they'd just pocketed it like petty criminals. "I told them no," Ryan continued. "I told them they'd already taken enough from you and Emma, and I weren't going to be part of whatever scheme they were running. That's when Emma told me the rest." He pulled out his phone, scrolled through something, and then turned the screen toward me. It was a text thread between Emma and our mother from 2 weeks before the wedding. I recognized Emma's number at the top. Emma had written, "Mom, I feel sick about this. She's going to find out we're not inviting her." Patricia's response came quickly. "She'll get over it. She always does. You want this wedding or not?" Emma, "I do, but..." Patricia, "Then stop complaining and trust me. Allison is too invested to back out now anyway. The money's already spent." I read the exchange 3 times, my hands starting to shake as the full meaning settled into my bones. Emma had known. Not about the financial theft, perhaps, but about the uninvitation. She'd known they were planning to exclude me, had felt sick about it, had expressed doubt, and then had gone along with it anyway, because the alternative was losing her perfect wedding. "She knew," I said, my voice coming out flat and distant. "For at least 2 weeks she knew." "Yes." Ryan took his phone back, unable to meet my eyes. "She told me she tried to text you an apology the night before the wedding. Wrote it out, cried over it, and then deleted it without sending it. She was afraid you'd talk her out of going through with it, afraid our parents would make good on their threat to cancel everything if she contacted you." I felt something crack inside my chest, some remaining fragment of hope I'd been carrying, that Emma was innocent in all this, that she'd been kept in the dark, that she'd find out what happened and rush to my defense. But she'd known. She'd chosen silence and complicity, because speaking up might have cost her something. "She's falling apart," Ryan said quietly. "She cries every night. She can't sleep. She's terrified you're going to retaliate somehow, but she's more terrified that you'll just never speak to her again. I'm not here to make excuses for her, Allison. What she did was wrong. She was weak when you needed her to be strong. But she's not them. She's not cruel like they are. She's just scared, and she's always been scared of them." He stood up, preparing to leave, but paused at the door. "Emma's been trying to figure out how to repay you without your parents knowing. She's emptied her savings account, everything she had before we got married. It's $8,000. She wants to send it to you, but she's afraid you won't accept it. Afraid it's not enough, afraid of what it means either way." After Ryan left, I sat alone in my office for over an hour, the building completely silent around me, except for the hum of the ventilation system. My computer screen had gone dark. The city lights glittered through my window. and I stared at nothing, trying to process this new dimension of betrayal. Part of me had needed Emma to be innocent. I'd needed someone in my family to be worth saving, someone who would have stood up for me if only they'd known what was happening. The idea that my parents were monsters was somehow bearable if Emma was still good, still salvageable, still the little sister I'd protected and loved despite everything. But she'd known. She'd felt sick about it, which meant she understood it was wrong, and she'd done it anyway. She'd stood on that beach in the Maldives wearing a dress bought with my money, calling another woman her sister, celebrating a wedding funded by my theft. And she'd known exactly what it had cost me. And yet Ryan was right about something I didn't want to acknowledge. Emma wasn't cruel. She wasn't calculating. She was weak. She'd been raised in the same house I had, subjected to the same conditional love, taught the same lessons about whose needs mattered and whose didn't. The difference was that Emma had learned to survive by becoming what they wanted, while I'd survived by becoming useful. We'd both been damaged, just in different ways. I pulled out my phone and stared at Emma's contact information, the number I'd called desperately the day before her wedding, the sister I'd thought I was giving a gift to. My finger hovered over the delete button. It would be so easy to erase her, to treat her exactly the way they'd treated me, to show her what it felt like to be removed from someone's life without warning or explanation. But I didn't delete it. Because Ryan had handed me something more complicated than simple villainy. He'd shown me that Emma was both guilty and victimized, both complicit and afraid. She'd betrayed me, but she'd done it because 30 years of conditioning had taught her that preserving her parents' approval was worth any price, including her own integrity. Someone could be both a villain and a victim. Someone could hurt you and still deserve your pity. And that realization was somehow harder to bear than pure hatred would have been. I wanted to hate Emma. Instead, I found something much harder: pity. 3 days after Ryan's visit, my assistant brought me an envelope that had arrived in the morning mail. No return address, just my name and office address written in handwriting I'd recognize anywhere. Emma's looping cursive, the kind they don't teach anymore, that our mother had insisted she practice for hours as a child, because a lady should have beautiful penmanship. I held the envelope for a long time before opening it, already knowing that whatever was inside would complicate everything I'd been working so hard to make simple. Inside were 8 pages torn from a spiral notebook, the edges still ragged. The paper was wrinkled in places, and I could see where tears had fallen and dried, leaving faint water stains that distorted some of the words. Emma's handwriting filled every page, cramped and urgent, like she'd written it in one sitting and been afraid to stop. "I don't expect forgiveness," the letter began. "I don't even deserve a response. But I need you to know I see what I did, and I'll carry that shame for the rest of my life. You were the only person in that family who ever truly loved me, and I betrayed you because I was too scared to be unloved by them." I had to stop reading and close my eyes, steadying my breath before continuing. She wrote about growing up in my shadow, about how every accomplishment of mine became a measuring stick she could never reach. How our mother would sigh when Emma brought home a B and say, "Well, you're not Allison, but you're pretty, and that counts for something." How our father would talk about my career success at dinner parties, and then pat Emma on the head like she was still 5 years old, saying, "Emma's finding her own path, aren't you, sweetheart?" with a tone that made it clear he thought her path led nowhere important. "They told me I was the pretty one, but never the smart one," she wrote. "They told me I was creative, but not practical. They told me I was loved, but in a way that felt like consolation prize for not being you. And I started to believe that being loved was enough, that I didn't need to be successful or independent or strong, because at least I had their affection. I didn't realize until recently that their affection was just another kind of chain." Then she described things I'd never known, incidents that had happened behind closed doors while I was away at college, or working late, or building the life I thought was my escape. She wrote about the time our mother locked her in her bedroom the day before a family photo because Emma had gained weight, and Patricia wanted her to think about what she'd done to her figure. Emma was 17. She'd missed dinner and breakfast, and when she came out for the photo shoot, she smiled perfectly, while our mother whispered threats about what would happen if she didn't hold in her stomach. She wrote about the constant comparisons that went both ways, how our father would point at my career achievements and tell Emma, "See, this is proof we raised one right at least. What's your excuse?" She wrote about overhearing our parents argue about what to do about Emma when she was 25 and still hadn't found a real career, our mother insisting she just needed more time, and our father saying they'd already wasted enough money on her. They pit us against each other on purpose. Emma wrote, her handwriting getting shakier on this page. You were the achiever who could never be loved. I was the beloved who could never achieve. We were both losing the same rigged game, but we were so busy looking at each other's assigned role that we never saw we were both prisoners. Tucked between the 6th and 7th pages was a printed screenshot of a text message. The one she'd written the night before the wedding and never sent. I pulled it out and read the few lines. Allison, I'm so sorry. Please understand I'm not strong like you. I wanted to stop this, but I don't know how to stand up to them. I've never known how. Please forgive me. E. Below the message were the words, "Message deleted," with a timestamp from 11:47 p.m., the night before her wedding. Proof of her cowardice, she'd called it in the letter. Proof that she'd known exactly what was happening, had felt the wrongness of it, had even found words for an apology, and then had chosen silence anyway because courage required a strength she'd never been forced to develop. The last 2 pages were the hardest to read. I used to be jealous of you, she admitted. Your independence, your strength, the way you seemed to have escaped their need for approval. I thought you were free in a way I could never be. But after the wedding, watching you disappear from our family while they celebrated with your money, I realized something horrible. You didn't escape. You were exiled, and I helped them do it because I was too weak to stand alone. She told me Ryan had convinced her to start therapy, that she'd been going twice a week for the past month. I'm not doing it to fix this, she wrote. I know I can't fix what I've done to you. I can't give you back the family you deserved, or the sister you needed me to be. But I need to become someone who would never do this again. I need to understand why I chose a wedding over my own integrity, why I valued their approval over your pain, why I was willing to let you be erased if it meant I could stay in the picture. She ended with words that felt like they'd been ripped from somewhere deep and painful. I have $8,000 in savings. It's not enough. It could never be enough. But Ryan said you should know I want to give it to you not because it repays anything, but because it's the only concrete way I have to show you that I see what was taken. I don't expect you to accept it. I don't expect anything from you ever again. But I needed you to know that I'm trying to become someone different, someone who would have chosen you. I read the letter 5 times sitting at my desk as the afternoon light shifted across my office. Each time I read it, I felt something different. Anger at her weakness. Recognition of my younger self in her confessions. Fury that she'd seen the trap and stepped into it anyway. Grief for both of us for the sisters we might have been if we'd been raised by different people. Part of me wanted to crumple the letter and throw it away to treat her apology with the same dismissiveness they'd treated my existence. Part of me wanted to write back and tell her that understanding why she'd hurt me didn't make the hurt less real. That going to therapy was good, but it didn't undo the fact that she'd stood on that beach calling someone else her sister while spending money I'd earned through years of careful saving. But there was something in her words that I couldn't ignore, something that resonated with a truth I'd been circling around for weeks. We had both been victims of the same rigged game. She'd been given love without respect, and I'd been given respect without love, and both of us had been taught that this was the best we could expect. The difference was that Emma had learned to survive by making herself small and agreeable, while I'd learned to survive by making myself useful and distant. Both strategies had cost us pieces of ourselves. She was right that I hadn't escaped. I'd just been cast out in a different way, exiled rather than imprisoned. And she was right that she'd helped them do it, that her silence had been its own form of violence, even if it came from fear rather than malice. But here's what she was wrong about. She thought we were still both victims, still both trapped in patterns we couldn't break. She was trying to break hers through therapy and confession and the slow work of becoming someone different. And I respected that even through my anger. But I'd already broken mine. I wasn't trying to earn their love anymore. I wasn't making myself smaller or more useful or more perfect in hopes they'd finally see me. I was done playing the game entirely, and I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly what the rules had been. Emma was right about one thing: we'd both been victims. But only one of us was done playing. 2 months after the wedding, I sat in Sarah Chen's office and wrote a check for $5,000 to hire a private investigator. Sarah had recommended him with the caveat that he was expensive but thorough, the kind of person who found things people worked very hard to hide. His name was Marcus Webb, a former forensic accountant who'd transitioned into private investigation after retiring from the FBI. If my parents had financial skeletons, Sarah assured me Marcus would find them. 3 weeks later, Marcus returned with a report that was 63 pages long. I read it in one sitting in my living room on a Saturday morning, and with each page my understanding of who my parents were shifted and darkened. They weren't just people who'd made bad decisions or who'd stolen from me in a moment of desperation. They were career exploiters who'd built their entire lifestyle on other people's money. Robert's marketing consultancy, the business he'd run for 25 years, and always described as doing fine or getting by, had actually been losing money for the past 5 years. Not just failing to grow, but actively hemorrhaging cash. Marcus had obtained copies of their business tax returns through methods I didn't ask about, and the numbers told a stark story. The business showed consistent losses offset only by what my father had claimed as business loans on the books. Except those business loans were my gifts, my transfers, my checks written to help with what I'd thought were temporary cash flow problems. By claiming my gifts as loans to the business, my parents had been reducing their taxable income illegally. Personal gifts aren't tax deductible, but business loans create paper losses that offset income. Marcus estimated they'd avoided approximately $45,000 in taxes over the past 7 years through this scheme. The IRS would want that money back, plus penalties plus interest. And if they could prove intent, which the documented pattern suggested they could, my parents were looking at potential criminal charges. But it got worse. The section of Marcus's report labeled "Additional Family Exploitation" made my hands shake as I read it. My grandmother Patricia's mother had died 5 years ago in a nursing home after a 2-year decline from Alzheimer's. I remembered visiting her a few times, though my mother had always discouraged frequent visits, saying Grandma Dorothy got confused and agitated by too many people. I'd thought my mother was protecting her, managing her care with the devotion of a good daughter. Marcus had subpoenaed my grandmother's bank records as part of establishing a pattern of financial abuse. What he found was systematic theft. In the 2 years before my grandmother's death, Patricia had made 27 withdrawals from her mother's savings account totaling $89,000. The withdrawal slips all had the notation "care expenses" written in my mother's handwriting. But Marcus had also obtained records from the nursing home where my grandmother had lived. The facility was paid for entirely through Medicare and my grandmother's pension, which was directly deposited to the nursing home's account. There were no additional care expenses, no special treatments, no extra services. The $89,000 Patricia had withdrawn, claiming it was for her mother's care, had gone somewhere else entirely. Marcus had tracked it through credit card statements and bank deposits. A kitchen remodel that cost $32,000 completed the same year my grandmother went into the nursing home. A 3-week European vacation for my parents costing $18,000. Jewelry purchases, a new car, designer furniture. They'd stolen their dying mother's savings and used it to upgrade their lifestyle, all while that mother lay in a nursing home forgetting her own name. I sat with that knowledge for a long time, staring at the bank statements Marcus had included as exhibits. My grandmother had worked her entire life, had saved carefully, and in her final years when she was most vulnerable, her own daughter had drained her accounts and spent the money on luxuries. And my mother had done it without apparent guilt or hesitation, the same way she'd taken my wedding money, the same way she'd ruined my credit. This wasn't opportunistic crime. It was their operating system. I called Sarah and scheduled an emergency meeting. 2 days later, I sat across from her again, this time with Marcus's full report spread across her conference table. She'd spent the morning reviewing it, making notes cross-referencing with the evidence I'd already gathered. "This changes everything," she said, looking up from the pages. "This isn't just about your wedding anymore. This is a pattern of financial exploitation spanning at least a decade, possibly longer. We have enough here for multiple legal actions." She pulled out a legal pad and began outlining strategy, her pen moving quickly across the page. "Here's what I'm recommending. First, we file a civil lawsuit for breach of contract and fraud regarding the wedding funds. With the signed agreement and the evidence that they lied about canceling the wedding, this is straightforward. You'll likely win and recover your $80,000 plus damages." She moved to the second point. "Simultaneously, we file a report with the IRS regarding the fraudulent tax deductions. I have a contact there who handles cases like this. They'll audit your parents' business returns, and when they find what we found, your parents will owe back taxes, penalties, and potentially face criminal prosecution for tax fraud." Third, she continued, tapping her pen on the credit card evidence, "we pursue charges for identity theft regarding the business credit card opened using your name as reference without your permission. This one is trickier legally, but combined with everything else, it establishes a pattern that strengthens all the other claims." She set down her pen and looked at me directly, her expression serious. "But Allison, you need to understand what you're unleashing here. Once we file these actions, it becomes public record. The lawsuit will be covered by local media at minimum, possibly more, given how compelling the story is. Your parents' financial crimes will be exposed. Your family's dysfunction will be on display for anyone who wants to look. And your parents will absolutely hate you for it if they don't already." She paused, letting that sink in. "I need to know you're prepared for that. For the backlash, for the public nature of it, for the permanence of it. Are you ready for your family to hate you?" I didn't hesitate with my answer, though the words surprised even me when they came out. When did they ever not? Sarah's expression shifted, something like respect crossing her face. She nodded slowly. "All right then, let's build the case." Over the next 2 weeks, we compiled everything into organized exhibits. Every bank statement, every contract, every email, every text message. Marcus's investigation report with all its damning appendices. The credit reports showing the damage to my score. The signed agreement my father had laughed about. The wedding video I'd downloaded before they could make it private. We built a fortress of evidence, each piece supporting the others, creating a narrative so clear that no reasonable person could miss it. I wasn't doing this because I wanted to hurt them, though I knew it would. I wasn't doing it because I wanted revenge, though I knew some people would call it that. I was doing it because for 36 years my parents had operated without consequences, stealing and manipulating and exploiting anyone vulnerable enough to trust them. They'd done it to me, to Emma, to my grandmother, probably to others I didn't even know about. And they'd gotten away with it because their victims either didn't realize what was happening or were too ashamed to make it public. I didn't want revenge. I wanted something much simpler: consequences. 3 months after the wedding, my phone buzzed with a text from my father's number. I stared at it for a full minute before opening it, my first direct contact with either parent since that dismissive message telling me the wedding was canceled. The text read, "Your mother is very hurt you haven't called. She'd like you to come to her birthday dinner, family only." I almost laughed at the audacity. They'd stolen from me, excluded me, erased me from my own sister's wedding, and now they were offended that I hadn't called to chat. But beneath my initial anger, I recognized the text for what it actually was. They needed something. Probably money. They always reached out when they needed something, and the politeness of the request meant they were desperate enough to pretend the past 3 months hadn't happened. I forwarded the text to Sarah Chen with a single question: "Can I use this?" She called me within 20 minutes. We discussed California's recording laws in detail. She explained that in a private residence, you generally need consent from all parties to record a conversation legally. But there was a critical loophole: if you announce that you're recording and the other parties continue speaking, that constitutes implied consent. If they object and ask you to stop, you have to stop. But anything said after your announcement and before their objection is admissible. "You're thinking of going and trying to get them to confess something on tape," Sarah said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Then announce it clearly. Say, 'I'm recording this conversation,' before you ask any substantive questions. If they tell you to stop recording, you stop. If they keep talking, you've got consent. But Allison, be prepared for them to either refuse to talk or to be very careful about what they say." I texted my father back, "I'll come to dinner. What time?" The response was immediate. 7 p.m. Saturday. So glad you're being mature about this." I spent the days leading up to the dinner preparing. I downloaded a backup application that automatically synced audio recordings to cloud storage in real time, uploading every 60 seconds to 3 separate servers. I tested it repeatedly, making sure it worked even if my phone's local storage was deleted. I practiced what I would say, how I would announce the recording, what questions I would ask. I went over worst-case scenarios with Sarah. I was as ready as I could be. Saturday evening, I drove to my parents' house with a small bouquet of flowers and a bottle of wine, the kind of gifts you bring when you're playing a role. My hands were steady on the steering wheel, but my heart was racing. I parked in front of the house I'd grown up in and sat for a moment, breathing deeply, centering myself. My mother answered the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Allison, sweetheart, I'm so glad you came." She accepted the flowers and wine with the gracious air of someone receiving a tribute from a subordinate. My father appeared behind her, his expression carefully neutral. "Come in, come in." Dinner was surreal. We ate chicken and roasted vegetables while making stilted small talk about weather and traffic. No one mentioned the wedding. No one mentioned the 3 months of silence. No one acknowledged that anything had happened at all. It was like they expected me to simply forget to reset to factory settings and resume my role as the dutiful daughter who provided whatever they needed without question. After dinner, my mother suggested we have coffee in the living room. This was it, the moment they'd been waiting for all evening. Once we were settled, my father cleared his throat in that familiar way that signaled he was about to ask for something. Before he could speak, I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I opened the recording app, pressed record, and placed the phone face up on the coffee table between us where they could clearly see the screen. "I'm recording this conversation for my records," I said clearly and calmly. My mother's expression changed instantly, the pleasant mask sliding away to reveal something colder underneath. "Excuse me." I said, "I'm recording this conversation. I need to document family discussions now. I'm sure you understand, given everything that's happened." My father's face flushed red. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" I kept my voice level, professional, the same tone I used in business meetings. "It means I need to protect myself. So I'm recording. You're welcome to continue the conversation or not, but the recording stays on." Patricia moved faster than I expected. She lunged forward and grabbed my phone from the table, her fingers fumbling with the screen. I watched her find the recording, her lips pressed into a thin line, and delete it with a vicious stab of her finger. She dropped the phone back on the table with a clatter. "You think you're so smart?" Her voice was shaking with rage. "You think anyone would believe you over us? You're just the bitter daughter who can't be happy for her sister. You've always been jealous of Emma, always trying to make everything about you." My father stood up, his hands clenched at his sides. "This is about family loyalty, Allison. Something you apparently know nothing about. We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us, by trying to record us like we're criminals." I stood up slowly, picked up my phone, and looked at both of them. This was the moment where the old Allison would have apologized, would have tried to explain, would have scrambled to repair the relationship. But I wasn't that person anymore. "Before I go, I have one question. The wedding money I gave you for Emma's wedding, did you actually use all of it for the wedding?" My mother's eyes flashed. "We're not discussing this with you while you're recording. I already deleted the recording," I said, which was true. She had deleted the local file. "I just want to know, Did you use my $80,000 for Emma's wedding? My father's expression shifted and I saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. He thought I had no recording, no evidence, no way to use this conversation against him. So he told me a version of what he probably considered the truth. We used it for what the family needed. Emma's wedding was just part of it. We had debts, Allison. Real problems. We did what we had to do. I nodded slowly. Thank you for being honest. I walked to the door and neither of them tried to stop me. My mother called after me, her voice sharp. Don't bother coming back until you're ready to apologize for this disrespect. I didn't respond. I just walked to my car, got in, and sat in the driver's seat for 5 minutes, letting myself shake. My hands trembled. My breath came fast and shallow. The confrontation had been worse than I'd imagined, more hostile, more revealing of the contempt they actually felt for me. Then I pulled out my phone and opened the settings. I navigated to the backup app and checked the sync history. The recording had been uploading in real time, backing up every 60 seconds to 3 separate cloud storage locations. Even though my mother had deleted the local file, the backup had continued running in the background until I'd left the house. I opened the cloud storage and played back the audio. It was all there, crystal clear. My mother's accusation that I was bitter and jealous. My father's comment about family loyalty. And most importantly, his admission when I'd asked about the money. We used it for what the family needed. Emma's wedding was just part of it. An explicit confession that they hadn't used my $80,000 exclusively for the wedding as agreed. An admission of fraud time-stamped and backed up in 3 separate locations in my father's own words. I sat in my car outside their house and allowed myself a small smile. My mother thought she destroyed evidence. She just confirmed it. The week after the recording, Margaret invited me to her home in the hills overlooking the city. I'd been to company events at her house before, crowded affairs with past appetizers and networking, but I'd never been invited for a private visit. She opened the door in casual clothes, jeans, and a sweater, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen her at the office. She handed me a glass of red wine without asking if I wanted one, and led me to her back porch, where 2 comfortable chairs faced a view of the city lights beginning to flicker on as dusk settled. "Tell me where you are with all of this," she said, settling into her chair. "Not the logistics, the emotional part." I told her about the recording, about my mother's rage, about my father's confession that they'd used my money for their debts. I told her about the evidence I'd been gathering, the lawsuit Sarah was preparing, the IRS report ready to file. I laid it all out while Margaret listened without interrupting, the way she always did, giving me her complete attention. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, watching the city below us. Then she spoke in a voice that was softer than her usual professional tone, but no less certain. "I've never told anyone at work this story, but I think you need to hear it." She took a sip of her wine. "When I was 35, my father died and left me his import business to manage. It was successful, valuable, worth about $2 million at the time. My 3 brothers immediately assumed I'd split everything equally with them, even though Dad's will was clear that the business came to me. When I refused, they went behind my back and embezzled nearly $400,000 over the course of 6 months. I turned to look at her, surprised. Margaret had always seemed so composed, so unshakable. I'd never imagined her as someone who'd been betrayed by her own family. I found out when an accountant noticed irregularities. By then, they'd spent most of it. They felt entitled to the money because I was just the daughter who got lucky, while they were real businessmen who deserved their share regardless of what our father's will said. She smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Sound familiar? What did you do?" I had 2 choices. I could let it destroy me, consume me with bitterness and rage, turn me into someone defined by what they'd taken. Or I could let it define me differently. I chose justice over revenge. She looked at me directly. "And I need you to understand the difference, Allison, because it's the difference between who you become after this." "What's the difference?" "Revenge is making them suffer for the sake of suffering. It's about inflicting pain because you're in pain. Justice is making things right, or as right as they can be made. Revenge is personal, and it leaves you empty because no amount of their suffering actually heals your wound. Justice is impersonal. It's about accountability and consequences, and it leaves you free because you're not carrying their punishment around with you forever. I thought about that, rolling the words around in my mind like stones testing their weight. How do you know which one you're doing? Margaret leaned forward. Ask yourself what you actually want. Not what would make you feel better in the moment, but what your real goal is. Do you want your money back? Do you want them to apologize and mean it? Do you want them punished and suffering? Or do you want to ensure they can't do this to anyone else? I'd been so focused on building my case, on gathering evidence and consulting with attorneys, that I hadn't actually stopped to articulate what I was trying to achieve. I sat with the question, looking out at the city lights, thinking about my parents in their house, with their lies and their debts, and their complete inability to see me as anything but a resource to exploit. I want them to face the truth publicly, I said slowly, the answer forming as I spoke it. I want everyone who saw that wedding video and commented about what a beautiful family we are. I want all of them to know what it actually cost. I want Emma to see clearly what happens when you choose complicity. And I want to sleep at night knowing I didn't just let them erase me, knowing I didn't teach them that they can do this without consequences. Margaret nodded, something like approval in her expression. Then you want accountability. You want the truth to be visible. That's justice, not revenge. But it will hurt them, I said. The lawsuit will be public. The IRS investigation could destroy them financially. People will know what they did. Yes, it will hurt them. But that's not your goal. It's a side effect of the truth coming out. There's a difference. She refilled both our glasses. Here's what I learned from my own situation. Don't act out of anger. Wait until you feel nothing when you think about them, until you're operating from clarity rather than emotion. Don't reveal all your cards at once. Let them think they're winning. Let them get comfortable and careless and then move when they least expect it. And don't waste your energy explaining yourself to people who ask, "Why are you doing this?" Those people don't really want to understand. Explain yourself only to people who ask, "What do you need?" because those are the people who actually want to help. She set down her glass and looked at me seriously. You've got your evidence. Sarah has the legal framework ready. But here's my advice: wait. Give it another few weeks. Let your parents think you've backed down after that disastrous dinner. Let them believe you're too scared or too weak to actually follow through. Let them get comfortable in their lie. Why wait? I have everything I need now. Because simultaneous devastation is more effective than drawn-out warfare. Right now, you could file the lawsuit. Then a week later, file the IRS report. Then a week after that, pursue the identity theft charges. Each one gives them time to prepare for the next one, to hire lawyers to craft their story to mount a defense. She leaned back in her chair. But if you file everything at once on the same day, they're overwhelmed. They don't know which fire to put out first. They make mistakes. They contradict themselves. And by the time they realize how much trouble they're actually in, it's already too late. The strategic elegance of it was beautiful in a cold, precise way. I could see exactly what she meant. If I filed piecemeal, my parents would have time to regroup between each blow. But if everything hit at once, the lawsuit and the IRS report and the credit fraud complaint all landing on the same day, they'd be buried before they could mount an effective response. How long did you wait? I asked. 4 months. Long enough that my brothers thought they'd gotten away with it, that I was too weak or too forgiving to do anything. Then one day they each received a summons, a subpoena, and a cease and desist letter, all in the same afternoon. She smiled, and this time there was satisfaction in it. They called me panicking, asking what was happening. I didn't answer. By the time they got lawyers and figured out the scope of what I'd filed, I'd already frozen business assets and secured preliminary injunctions. The whole thing was over in 6 months. I got my money back, they were barred from ever working in the industry again, and I walked away free. Free, I repeated. Free, she confirmed. Because I didn't do it to hurt them. I did it to make things right. And when it was over, I didn't have to carry them around with me anymore. I didn't spend years thinking about what else I could do to make them suffer. I just moved on with my life, and they became people I used to know. We sat in comfortable silence as full darkness fell, and the city below us became a constellation of lights. I thought about freedom, about the difference between revenge and justice, about the weight of carrying other people's punishment versus the lightness of simply holding them accountable and walking away. "Give it a few more weeks," Margaret said. "Let them think they've won, then file everything at once and watch their world collapse in a single day. Not because you want them to suffer, but because you want the truth to have consequences." I nodded, understanding. Margaret was right. The best revenge isn't loud, it's thorough. I followed Margaret's advice and waited. For 6 weeks, I went about my life as if nothing had changed. I went to work, attended meetings, had coffee with colleagues. I didn't contact my parents. I didn't respond to the single text my mother sent asking if I was done with my tantrum. I let them believe I'd retreated into silence out of shame or fear or whatever narrative they'd constructed to explain my absence. I let them get comfortable. Then 5 months after the wedding, I received a notification from the local community events page. Pierce Marketing Solutions was hosting a community open house and town hall to celebrate 25 years in business. The event was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at the community center, and according to the description, it was open to the public. Business owners and community members were invited to join the Pierce family as we celebrate a quarter-century of trust, integrity, and community service. The words trust and integrity nearly made me laugh out loud. But more than that, I saw the opportunity for exactly what Margaret had described. A public forum legally protected where I could ask questions they'd have to answer in front of witnesses. I called Sarah immediately. "Can they stop me from attending a public event?" "No. If it's advertised as open to the community, they can't bar you without cause. And asking questions during a Q&A session is protected speech, as long as you're not threatening or physically disruptive." I registered to attend online, listing my credentials as A. Pierce Senior Financial Analyst, Henderson & Associates. Professional, legitimate, and just vague enough that they wouldn't notice my first initial until I was already there. Then I prepared. I arrived at the community center 30 minutes early and tested something I'd researched carefully, the hall's wireless display system. Most modern community centers have them now for presentations. I connected my phone to the network, verified I could project to the screen at the front of the room, and then disconnected. When the time came, I'd be able to share my screen with a single tap. I took a seat in the back row where I could see everything but wouldn't be immediately visible to my parents when they took the stage. The room filled gradually with about 80 people. I recognized some of them from the neighborhood local business owners my father had worked with, potential clients he was clearly hoping to impress. My parents appeared right on time, my mother in an elegant dress, my father in a suit, both of them wearing the pleasant professional expressions of people who believed they were respected members of the community. My father gave a speech that was practiced and smooth, full of platitudes about family values and the importance of trust in business relationships. He talked about building Pierce Marketing Solutions from the ground up, about the relationships he'd fostered, about his commitment to integrity and transparency. My mother nodded along occasionally, dabbing at her eyes as if moved by his words. Several people in the audience smiled. A few took notes. No one seemed to find the irony in anything he was saying. After the speech, the moderator, a woman from the Chamber of Commerce, opened the floor for questions. A few people asked about services and pricing. Someone asked about the company's approach to social media marketing. Softball questions that my father answered with confidence and charm. Then I stood up. I saw the exact moment my father noticed me. His face went from confident to pale in the space of a single heartbeat. My mother's hand flew to her throat, but the moderator, not understanding the dynamics, had already acknowledged me. "Yes, the woman in the back. You have a question." I kept my voice calm and clear, the professional tone I used in board meetings. "Yes, thank you. I have a question about business ethics. If a company principal accepts $80,000 from a family member for a specific stated purpose, then uses that money for undisclosed personal debts, and subsequently excludes that family member from the event they funded, would you characterize that as fraud or simply creative accounting? The room went utterly silent. My father tried to respond, stammering something about not understanding the question, but I was already moving. I tapped my phone screen and connected to the hall's display system. The projection screen behind my parents flickered to life. "Let me clarify with documentation," I said, my voice steady, even though my heart was pounding. I displayed the first image, the signed agreement between my father and me, his signature clear at the bottom, the text reading, "Gift for wedding expenses. If wedding canceled, funds returned." "This is a contract my father signed," I narrated, keeping my tone factual, almost clinical. "Acknowledging receipt of $80,000 for my sister's wedding." I swiped to the next image, a series of bank transfers with dates and amounts, each one clearly showing money moving from my account to wedding vendors. "These are the payments I made directly. Venue catering, photography, flowers. $80,000 exactly as agreed." Next image, a screenshot of my father's text message. "The wedding's canceled, we'll handle it." The timestamp visible. This is the message I received 3 days before the wedding, informing me it was canceled. Final image is still from the wedding video. Emma and Ryan on a beach in the Maldives. My parents raising champagne glasses, the date stamp showing it was taken exactly when my father claimed the wedding was canceled. This is my sister's wedding, which, as you can see, was not canceled. I was simply not invited to the event I paid for. The room erupted. Voices overlapped, people turning to each other, gasps and exclamations. My father tried to speak over the noise, his face now red instead of pale. "This is a private family matter. This is inappropriate. I funded a wedding and was excluded from it." I continued, my voice cutting through the chaos. "These are my parents, Robert and Patricia Pierce, principals of Pierce Marketing Solutions, a company that apparently defines integrity as taking $80,000 under false pretenses." My mother stood up, her voice shrill. "You have no right to humiliate us like this. This is slander. This is documentation," I interrupted calmly. "Every word I've said is backed by evidence. The signed contract, the bank transfers, the text message, the video. All of it true, all of it verifiable." People in the audience were pulling out their phones now, some clearly recording, others typing frantically. I could see social media apps open on multiple screens. My father tried one more time, his voice desperate. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding, a family disagreement that—" Patricia's control snapped entirely. She screamed at me across the room, her careful composure completely shattered. "You have no right to humiliate us. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us." I looked at her, and in that moment, I felt nothing. Not anger, not pain, not even satisfaction. Just a clear, cold certainty that I was doing exactly what needed to be done. "You have no right to steal from your daughter," I said quietly, but in the shocked silence of the room, everyone heard it. I disconnected my phone from the display, picked up my bag, and walked toward the exit. The crowd parted for me automatically, people staring, some with their mouths literally open. As I reached the door, I heard my father's voice behind me trying to salvage something, claiming family complexities and misunderstandings. But his words were drowned out by the buzz of conversation, the clicking of phone cameras, the sound of my parents' reputation crumbling in real time. I walked to my car, got in, and sat for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel. Then I pulled out my phone and checked social media. Someone had already posted a video of the confrontation. As I watched, the view count ticked up. 50 views. 100. 500. The comments were flooding in. Within 2 hours, the video had 50,000 views. By morning, they were infamous. 3 days after the town hall, I was trying to focus on actual work when my assistant buzzed my line. "Ms. Pierce, there's a woman in the lobby asking to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's about the Pierce family matter." Her voice dropped slightly. "She seems legitimate, not press. Should I send her away?" In the days since the video went viral, I'd been contacted by 3 local news stations, 2 bloggers, and countless strangers on social media. I'd ignored all of them on Sarah's advice. But something about the phrasing, "the Pierce family matter," delivered in my assistant's careful tone made me curious. "What's her name?" "Linda Sawyer. She says you won't remember her, but it's important." I hesitated, then made a decision I couldn't quite explain. "Send her up." The woman who appeared in my doorway a few minutes later was about 60, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and wearing a professional pantsuit that suggested she understood office environments. But it was her eyes that struck me kind in a way that seemed earned rather than natural, the kindness of someone who'd seen difficult things and chosen compassion anyway. "Ms. Pierce, thank you for seeing me without notice." She extended her hand and I shook it, noting the firmness of her grip. "My name is Linda Sawyer. I was a social worker with Child Protective Services. I was assigned to your case when you were 8 years old." I stared at her, searching my memory for any recollection of this woman, this case, this moment in my childhood. Nothing surfaced. "I'm sorry, I don't remember anything about that." "You wouldn't," she said gently. "May I sit?" I gestured to the chair across from my desk, and she settled into it with the calm of someone who'd done thousands of difficult interviews. "Your elementary school reported concerns about you. A teacher noticed bruises on your arms and legs, said you seemed withdrawn, that you were taking care of another student, your younger sister, in ways that seemed inappropriate for an 8-year-old. Packing her lunch, walking her to class, basically parenting her at school." The memory started to surface hazy and incomplete. I remembered being called to the principal's office, a woman with a soft voice asking me questions about how I got hurt, about what happened at home. I remembered being terrified, though I couldn't recall exactly why. "I investigated," Linda continued, her voice careful and measured. "I interviewed you alone in a room at your school. I asked about the bruises. You told me you fell a lot, that you were clumsy, that you'd fallen off your bike and down the stairs and tripped over toys. You had an explanation for everything." She paused, and I saw something painful cross her face. "But what I remember most clearly is that you weren't afraid of your parents. You were afraid of me. Specifically, you were terrified I would separate you from Emma." It came back in fragments. The room with the colorful posters meant to make children feel safe. The woman with the kind eyes asking gentle questions. My panic absolute and overwhelming at the thought of being taken away. Not because I'd be taken from my parents, but because Emma would be left alone with them. "You told me Emma needed you," Linda said quietly. "That she was little and got scared at night, and that you were the one who made sure she ate breakfast and had her homework done. You begged me not to take you away from her. You said, 'If I'm gone, who will take care of my sister?'" I felt my throat tighten. 8 years old, and I'd already been convinced that Emma's well-being was my responsibility, that I was the only thing standing between her and something terrible. "I interviewed your parents separately," Linda continued. "They were charming, cooperative, concerned. Your father explained that you were a very active child, always climbing trees and riding your bike too fast, that the bruises were from normal childhood accidents. Your mother cried and said she felt like a failure for not watching you more carefully. I examined Emma. She showed no signs of physical abuse, no bruises, no fear. She seemed happy, well cared for." Linda's hands twisted together in her lap. "I couldn't prove deliberate abuse. The bruises could have been accidental. You weren't reporting mistreatment. Your parents appeared appropriate. So I closed the case." "But you didn't believe them," I said, hearing the certainty in my own voice. "No, I didn't. I noted in my report that you showed signs of what we call parentification, that you were functioning as Emma's primary caregiver at an age when you should have been focused on your own childhood. I noted clear favoritism in how they discussed their daughters. I recommended a follow-up visit in 6 months to monitor the situation." Her voice went flat. "That follow-up never happened. Budget cuts eliminated my position 2 months later. I moved to a different agency, and your case was closed and filed away." She looked at me directly, and I saw years of regret in her expression. I've thought about you periodically over the years, wondered how you turned out, hoped you were okay. Then 3 days ago, I saw the video from the town hall. I saw your face, heard your voice, and I knew. I knew I'd been right 28 years ago. I knew I'd failed to protect you when you needed it. Linda reached into her bag and pulled out a checkbook, setting it on my desk. When I learned you were taking legal action against your parents, I contacted your attorney. I sent $15,000 with instructions to support the Pierce case. I told her not to reveal who it came from unless you specifically asked. I stared at the checkbook, then at her pieces clicking into place. You're the anonymous donor. Sarah mentioned someone had helped with legal fees, but she wouldn't tell me who. I've followed your career loosely over the years. Social workers tend to remember the cases that haunt us, and you haunted me. I'd look you up every few years, see that you'd graduated college, that you were working in finance, that you seemed successful. I saw you succeed despite your parents, not because of them. When you finally stood up to them publicly, when I saw that video of you calmly presenting evidence of their theft, I saw that terrified 8-year-old girl finally putting herself first. Finally demanding to be protected instead of being the protector. Her voice strengthened. I'm not giving you this money out of guilt, though I do feel guilty for not doing more when you were a child. I'm doing it because you deserve to have an adult who actually protects you. You deserved that at 8. You deserve it now at 36. Better late than never. Something broke open in my chest, something I'd been holding rigid for so long I'd forgotten it was there. Tears started falling before I could stop them, and I couldn't quite identify what I was feeling. Not sadness exactly, not relief. Something more complicated, something that felt like recognition. You saw it, I said, my voice breaking. All those years ago you saw what they were doing. I saw it, Linda confirmed. I just didn't have the power to stop it. I'm sorry for that, but I can help now, and I wanted you to know that someone saw the truth back then. Someone knew that little girl was carrying too much, and someone is grateful that woman finally put it down. For the first time in months, I cried in front of another person, not from pain, but from something I'd never expected to feel, the sensation of being defended, of having someone on my side. Not because I'd earned it, or paid for it, or proved I deserved it, but simply because they believed I should be protected. For 28 years, I thought no one had seen the truth. Someone had, and she'd been waiting to help. 6 months after Emma's wedding, on a Tuesday morning that felt no different from any other, Sarah Chen filed a comprehensive civil lawsuit against Robert and Patricia Pierce in county court. I wasn't there when she submitted the documents, but she called me from the courthouse steps to tell me it was done. No turning back now, she said, and I heard satisfaction in her voice. The complaint is public record as of this moment. The lawsuit named my parents as defendants and laid out 3 specific charges. First, breach of contract for violating the signed agreement that required return of funds if the wedding was canceled, combined with their documented lie about the cancellation. Second, fraud for deliberately misrepresenting the wedding's status and using designated funds for undisclosed purposes. Third, intentional infliction of emotional distress for the deliberate and calculated exclusion from an event I'd fully funded, followed by the public celebration that erased my existence. The complaint requested full return of $80,000 additional damages for the emotional and financial harm they'd caused, and recovery of all legal fees. The document Sarah filed was 47 pages long. I'd read every word of it twice before she submitted it. It included the signed agreement with my father's signature bank statements, showing every transfer, the text message claiming the wedding was canceled, screenshots from the wedding video proving it wasn't the recorded conversation from my mother's birthday dinner, Marcus Webb's investigative report, and statements from Diane, the wedding planner, and Linda Sawyer. It was meticulous, methodical, and irrefutable. Every claim was supported by evidence. Every assertion was backed by documentation. It read less like an accusation and more like a mathematical proof. Within hours, the local newspaper picked up the story. The headline read, "Daughter sues parents over wedding betrayal, $80K at stake." The article summarized the basic facts quoted from the public filing and included a comment from Sarah. This case represents a clear breach of contract and fraudulent misrepresentation. We have extensive documentation supporting every allegation. By that evening, the story had spread beyond local news. A blogger who specialized in family drama posted it with the headline, "Sister pays for wedding, gets uninvited, then this happened." That post got shared 3,000 times in the first 12 hours. The comments section became a forum for people to share their own stories of being overlooked, excluded, or exploited by family members. "This is every forgotten sibling's nightmare," one person wrote. "My parents did something similar, but I never had the courage to fight back. I hope she wins every penny." Another commented, "Sue them into bankruptcy. People like this never learn unless it costs them everything." The support was overwhelming and unexpected. Strangers were validating an experience I'd been trained my entire life to minimize and excuse. The attention had immediate consequences for my parents. Within a week, 3 of their major clients canceled contracts with Pierce Marketing Solutions, each citing vague ethical concerns or differences in values. Their business, already struggling, couldn't absorb the loss. The church where my father had served as deacon for 15 years asked him to step down, framing it as temporary, but making clear it was related to recent public matters that require resolution. My mother stopped attending her book club after the 3rd meeting, where members suddenly had reasons to leave early or sit on the opposite side of the room. The social fabric they'd carefully constructed over decades was unraveling thread by thread. I expected them to settle quietly to offer some portion of the money back in exchange for me dropping the lawsuit and signing a non-disclosure agreement. That's what Sarah predicted they'd do once the social consequences became clear. But I'd underestimated their capacity for denial and counterattack. 2 weeks after we filed, Sarah received notice that my parents had retained an attorney, a man named Gregory Davidson, who specialized in high-conflict family litigation. Another week later, Davidson filed a counterclaim on my parents' behalf. They were suing me for defamation, claiming that my public statements at the town hall and the resulting media coverage had destroyed their business reputation and caused severe emotional distress. Their legal argument was breathtaking in its audacity. The $80,000 they claimed had been a voluntary gift with no strings attached. The signed agreement, they argued, was merely a formality I'd insisted on for my own record-keeping, not a legally binding contract. They had every right, their filing stated, to manage their family's guest list as they saw fit, and my exclusion was a private family matter that I'd improperly made public. The counterclaim painted me as a jealous, mentally unstable woman who couldn't accept her sister's happiness and had launched a vindictive campaign to destroy her elderly parents over what was essentially a family disagreement. Davidson gave a statement to the press that ran in the same newspaper that had covered the original filing. "These are people in their late 60s who built a business over 25 years, only to have it torn apart by a daughter who can't forgive them for a perceived slight. Robert and Patricia Pierce are devastated not by the lawsuit, but by the realization that their daughter values money more than family. They're considering all legal options to restore their reputation." Sarah called me the evening the counterclaim was filed. "I need you to understand what's about to happen. They're going to try to make you look unstable, vindictive, and greedy. Davidson is good at this kind of character assassination. He'll paint them as confused elderly victims and you as the cruel daughter. It's going to get uglier before it gets better. Every past interaction, every family conflict, every time you said something they didn't like, it's all going to come out. They're going to attack who you are as a person." She paused, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "Are you ready for that? Because once we respond to this counterclaim, we're committed to seeing this through to trial if necessary. There's no quiet settlement after this point. It's going to be public, it's going to be painful, and they're going to do everything they can to make you doubt yourself." I thought about the journal I'd filled with 40 pages of their betrayals. I thought about Linda Sawyer seeing the truth when I was 8 years old. I thought about Emma's letter describing the same rigged game from a different angle. I thought about Margaret's advice to wait until I felt nothing, and realized I'd reached that point. Looking at my parents' counterclaim didn't make me angry or hurt. It made me tired of their refusal to simply acknowledge what they'd done. "I'm ready," I told Sarah. "Let them try to make me look crazy. Let them tell whatever story they want about the bitter, jealous daughter. None of it changes the facts. And the facts are that I have a signed contract. I have bank statements. I have their text message lying about the cancellation. I have the wedding video proving they lied. I have a recorded confession. I have witness statements. I have everything." Sarah's voice warmed with something like pride. "Yes, you do. Let's remind them of that." They wanted to make me look crazy. They forgot I had receipts for everything. 9 months after Emma's wedding, I walked into a courtroom for the preliminary hearing that would determine whether my case against my parents had sufficient merit to proceed to trial. The room was smaller than I'd expected from watching legal dramas on television, but it was packed with people. Reporters occupied the back rows, pens poised over notebooks. Community members I recognized filled the middle section. Some I knew had come to support me, others clearly aligned with my parents. Family friends sat scattered throughout their presence, marking which side they'd chosen in this public fracture. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Sarah wearing a navy suit I'd chosen specifically for its professional severity. Across the aisle, my parents sat with Gregory Davidson, and I was struck by how much older they looked than I remembered. My father's shoulders curved inward in a way they hadn't before, and my mother's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her purse. For a brief moment, I felt something that might have been pity, but it passed quickly when I remembered why we were here. Judge Catherine Reeves entered, and we all stood. She had a reputation for running an efficient courtroom with no tolerance for theatrics, and her opening statement confirmed it. She'd reviewed the evidence packet Sarah had submitted, she told us, and she wanted to make clear she'd already read every document. The contract with my father's signature, the bank statements showing $80,000 in transfers, the text message claiming the wedding was canceled, the wedding video proving it wasn't, the recorded conversation from my mother's birthday dinner where my father admitted using the money for what the family needed. Davidson stood to present his defense, and I watched him perform. That's what it was, a performance complete with theatrical gestures and a voice that alternated between reasonable concern and righteous indignation. He called my parents' friends to testify, women I'd known peripherally for years, who now sat in the witness box, and described me as someone I barely recognized. Patricia's book club friend said I'd always been a difficult child, very rigid and judgmental. Another woman testified that I was clearly jealous of Emma's natural warmth and beauty. A neighbor claimed I'd been standoffish and never satisfied with anything my parents did. Davidson wove their testimonies into a narrative where I became the villain, a cold woman who'd given a gift and then demanded gratitude, who couldn't stand to see her younger, prettier sister celebrated, who'd launched this vindictive lawsuit because I fundamentally didn't understand how families work. He showed the court photographs from Emma's wedding blown up on a screen. My parents smiling, Emma radiant, guests laughing and dancing. "Look at this beautiful celebration of love," Davidson said, his voice warm with manufactured emotion. "Should a daughter be able to sue her parents because she wasn't invited to a party? Even if she contributed financially, is every family gathering now subject to legal contract? This isn't fraud, Your Honor. This is a family disagreement being weaponized by a woman who values money more than relationships." I sat through an hour of character assassination listening to people describe me as calculating, cruel, and emotionally stunted. Sarah squeezed my hand under the table, once a brief gesture of solidarity, but mostly I just breathed steadily and reminded myself that none of their opinions changed the documents and evidence. Then Sarah stood and called Emma Morrison to the stand. I watched my sister enter from the back of the courtroom, and the change in her was visible even from a distance. She'd lost weight. Her face looked drawn older than her 28 years. She walked to the witness stand like someone approaching an execution, and when she raised her hand to be sworn in, I could see it shaking. Sarah's first questions were gentle, establishing basic facts. Emma confirmed she was my sister, that she'd gotten married 9 months ago, that I had offered to pay for the wedding. Then Sarah's voice sharpened slightly. Did your sister voluntarily offer this money, or was she pressured? Emma's voice came out barely above a whisper. She offered, but she thought she'd be there. She thought she was invited. Were you aware your parents planned to exclude her from the wedding? The pause felt like it lasted forever. The courtroom was completely silent. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Yes, I knew 2 weeks before the wedding. The room erupted in whispers. Judge Reeves raised her hand for silence. Did you try to stop them? Sarah asked. Emma broke down completely, her words coming between sobs. I should have. God, I should have. But I was scared they'd cancel everything if I defended her. I was scared I'd lose my wedding if I stood up for my sister. So I chose the wedding. I chose wrong. Davidson shot to his feet, objecting, trying to redirect, but Emma wasn't done. The words kept coming like she'd been holding them back for 9 months and couldn't contain them anymore. My parents told me Allison was too difficult to have there, that she'd ruin the day with her attitude, that it would be easier for everyone if she just wasn't invited. But that was a lie. The truth is, she paid for everything, and we erased her like she never existed. She deserved better. She always deserved better, and I was too weak to fight for her. I watched my sister sob on the witness stand, and what I felt wasn't triumph or vindication. It was sadness, deep and aching for both of us. For the sisters we might have been if we'd been raised by different people. For the relationship that had been twisted and broken by parents who'd made us compete for scraps of conditional love. Judge Reeves looked at Emma with something like sympathy, then looked at my parents with something decidedly colder. Davidson tried to salvage his defense with redirect questions, but everything he asked just gave Emma another opportunity to confirm what had happened, to describe the planning of my exclusion, to admit her complicity. Emma's testimony didn't just help my case, it destroyed our parents' defense. Judge Reeves called a 15-minute recess after Emma's testimony, and when we reconvened, the courtroom felt different, charged with a tension that hadn't been there before. The judge looked at the documents in front of her, then looked up at all of us with an expression that was both weary and decisive. I've reviewed the evidence submitted by both parties and heard testimony today that clarifies several disputed facts. The signed agreement between Ms. Pierce and her father clearly stipulated that the $80,000 was conditional upon Ms. Pierce's inclusion in the wedding celebration. The defendant's claim that the wedding was canceled is demonstrably and provably false, as evidenced by the wedding video vendor confirmations and witness testimony. Moreover, the recorded conversation from October indicates clear knowledge that the funds were misused for purposes other than those agreed upon. She paused, and I felt Sarah shift slightly beside me, a subtle movement of satisfaction. I'm ruling that there is sufficient evidence of both breach of contract and fraud to proceed to a full trial. The preliminary injunction preventing the defendants from disposing of assets will remain in place pending resolution. Judge Reeves looked directly at my parents, her gaze sharp. However, I'm going to strongly encourage both parties to pursue settlement through mediation. This family has sustained significant damage already. A trial will only deepen those wounds and make them permanent and public in ways that cannot be undone. I'm setting a trial date for 3 months from today, but I'm mandating that both parties attend mediation within the next 2 weeks. She set down her gavel with a decisive crack, and it was over. Sarah gathered her papers efficiently, and I stood on shaking legs. Across the aisle, my mother was crying into a tissue while my father stared straight ahead, his face gray and expressionless. As we filed out of the courtroom, I caught Emma's eye. She mouthed, "I'm sorry," before being ushered away by Ryan, and I nodded once, not trusting myself to speak. 2 weeks later, we sat in a mediation room in a downtown office building. The mediator was a retired judge named Harold Chen, no relation to Sarah, who specialized in high-conflict family disputes. He'd reviewed all the evidence beforehand and opened the session by stating plainly that my case was strong and my parents' defense was weak, and that his job was to help us avoid the expense and trauma of a trial by reaching a fair settlement. What I didn't expect was for the mediation to become a confession session. Harold asked direct questions, and under the weight of evidence and the reality that they were about to lose everything in a public trial, my parents began telling the truth. Not the whole truth perhaps, but more than they'd ever admitted before. My father, looking 10 years older than he had at the preliminary hearing, spoke in a flat, defeated voice. "We didn't use all $80,000 for the wedding. We used about $40,000 for the actual event. The wedding was beautiful, but we went cheaper on some things than Allison had originally approved. Different flowers, less expensive photographer package, scaled back the catering. We used the other $40,000 to pay down credit card debt and 3 months of mortgage arrears. We were about to lose the house." My mother added, her voice thick with tears. "We were drowning financially. The business was failing. We had debt we couldn't service. When Allison offered the money, we saw it as a way to solve multiple problems at once. We thought if she wasn't at the wedding, she'd never know we'd cut corners. We thought we could keep the house and give Emma her special day, and Allison would just think everything went as planned." Harold looked at them with professional neutrality. "Why didn't you simply ask Ms. Pierce for help with your financial situation?" The silence that followed lasted so long, I thought no one would answer. Then my father said something that somehow hurt more than the theft itself. "Because she would have said no. She would have wanted to see our finances, would have lectured us about responsibility and budgeting. She would have made us feel like failures. It was easier to just take the money and avoid the judgment. They'd stolen from me because asking would have required them to be vulnerable to admit they'd mismanaged their lives, to hear me tell them truths they didn't want to face. They'd chosen theft over honesty because honesty would have hurt their pride. The settlement was reached by the end of the day. My parents would pay me $105,000, the original $80,000 plus $25,000 in damages and legal fees. They would sell their house, which Harold verified had enough equity to cover the payment. Their business, already destroyed by the negative publicity, would be formally dissolved. They would move to a rental property and, per the agreement, have no further contact with me unless I initiated it. I signed the settlement agreement with a pen that felt too light in my hand. Sarah shook my hand and said, "You won. Complete victory." My parents signed on the other side of the table without looking at me. When it was done, I walked out of that office building into late afternoon sunshine that felt too bright, too cheerful for the heaviness sitting in my chest. I drove home in silence, parked in my building's garage, and took the elevator up to my condo. The settlement check printed on official bank paper sat in my purse. $105,000. More than I'd asked for. Complete financial restitution plus compensation for damages. Everything I'd fought for over the past 9 months. I made tea I didn't drink and sat on my couch as the sky outside darkened. The check lay on my coffee table, proof of my victory, evidence that justice had been served. My parents would lose their home, their business, their reputation, their standing in the community. Everything they'd built over decades was gone, and I had my money back. But I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no sense of triumph. Just an emptiness where I'd expected to feel whole. I'd won, but what had I won? Money I'd already earned. Validation from strangers. The destruction of people who'd never been capable of loving me the way I needed. I looked around my condo, clean and quiet, and filled with things I'd bought with money I'd earned, and realized winning hadn't changed anything fundamental. I was still alone. Still the daughter who wasn't wanted. Still carrying the weight of 36 years of not being enough. Justice, I understood in that moment, was different from healing. Justice meant they faced consequences, but it didn't mean I was free of the damage they'd caused. I got everything I asked for. So why did I feel like I'd lost 2 weeks after signing the settlement agreement? While I was still trying to understand why victory felt so empty, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, had gotten into the habit of screening calls after the media attention, but something made me pick up. "Ms. Pierce, my name is Harold Weinstein. I'm an estate attorney, and I've been the executor of your grandmother Dorothy Pierce's will for the past 10 years. I'm calling because a specific condition in her will has finally been met, and you're now entitled to information that's been held in trust." I sat down slowly, confused. My grandmother had died a decade ago when I was 26. I'd attended her funeral, remembered my parents handling the estate, thought everything had been settled years ago. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. My grandmother's estate was distributed 10 years ago." "Part of it was," Harold said carefully. "But your grandmother included what we call a time lock clause in her will. Certain assets and information were to be held and revealed only when specific conditions were met. One of those conditions was, and I'm quoting directly from the document, if either of my granddaughters initiates legal proceedings against my son Robert Pierce and his wife Patricia Pierce regarding financial exploitation or abuse." My hand tightened on the phone. She knew. 10 years ago she knew this would happen. "She suspected it might," Harold said gently. "And she wanted to make sure that if it did, you'd have resources. I've been monitoring public records as required by the trust terms. When your lawsuit was filed 6 months ago, it triggered the release conditions. I had to wait until the case was resolved one way or another. Now that settlement has been reached, I can contact you. I'm emailing you a document right now. You should read it before we discuss further." The email arrived while we were still on the phone. I opened it on my laptop, and the first thing I saw was a scanned image of a handwritten letter. The paper yellowed slightly with age, the handwriting instantly recognizable as my grandmother's elegant script. The date at the top read February 14th, 2 months before she died. "My dear Allison," it began, and I felt tears forming before I'd read another word. "If you're reading this, it means my son and his wife have finally done to you what I feared they would. I know Robert. I know Patricia. And I know them because I understand exactly how they were made, because I made Robert into who he is." I read on Harold, silent on the phone, giving me time. My grandmother's words were unflinching in their self-awareness. She described raising my father with conditional love, withholding affection, unless he achieved, comparing him constantly to other children, making him feel that his worth was measured only by his accomplishments. She wrote about how he'd grown up desperate for approval he could never quite earn, how he'd married Patricia, who'd learned similar lessons from her own cold mother, and how together they'd continued the cycle with Emma and me. "I was cruel," she wrote. "Not in obvious ways, not in ways that left visible scars, but in the constant message that love had to be earned and could be lost. Robert learned to manipulate and take because he was never taught that he had inherent worth. He taught you and Emma the same poison lessons I taught him. The pattern goes back further than me, probably generations of parents who didn't know how to love without conditions. But it can stop. It has to stop." The letter continued, and with each paragraph I understood more. "I'm leaving $500,000 in a trust fund with very specific conditions. The money will go to whichever of my granddaughters demonstrates the courage to legally confront Robert and Patricia's financial abuse. Not out of vindictiveness, but because that confrontation, that willingness to face them in court, means she's broken free. It means she's stopped believing she has to earn love through compliance and silence. It means the cycle is breaking." My grandmother's words blurred as tears fell faster. "Allison, I'm betting it's you. You were always the strong one, the one who survived by becoming competent and independent. Emma survived by becoming agreeable and dependent. Both strategies were responses to the same poison, but yours gives you a better chance of breaking free. You were always the strong one, though. I'm ashamed I rarely told you that when I was alive. I saw what they did to you, how they used you, and I said nothing because I was a coward who didn't want to admit I'd created the monster hurting you." The letter's final paragraph was both an apology and a charge. "Use this money not to hurt them, but to build something better. Don't give them a penny of it. I've written that restriction into the trust explicitly. They'll try to manipulate you for it, I'm sure, but you must refuse. Instead, use it to break the cycle I started. Help other people escape what I taught my son to do. Make something good from all this pain. I can't undo my mistakes, but maybe you can stop them from spreading further. Harold's voice came back on the line. The trust has been invested conservatively over the past 10 years and has grown to $485,000 after estate taxes and management fees. Per your grandmother's instructions, it's entirely yours, with only one restriction: you cannot give any portion of it directly to your parents. She was explicit about that. Everything else is your decision. I stared at the letter on my screen, at my grandmother's handwriting, forming words of confession and hope from beyond the grave. She'd seen the future because she understood the past. She'd known her son would eventually do to his children what she'd done to him. And she'd chosen me, specifically me, to be the one who stopped it. My grandmother saw the future. And she chose me to end it. For 3 days, the inheritance paperwork sat on my kitchen table, and I couldn't stop staring at the numbers. $485,000 from my grandmother's trust. $105,000 from the settlement with my parents. Combined, I was looking at nearly $600,000, a sum so large it felt abstract, like something that happened to other people in stories, rather than a real amount of money I could actually access. I ran calculations obsessively during those 3 days. With careful investing, I could retire in my late 40s instead of my 60s. I could travel, finally see all the places I'd told myself I'd visit someday when I had both time and money. I could buy a house instead of a condo, something with a yard and space to breathe. I could build a financial cushion so substantial I'd never have to worry about anything again, never have to be careful about spending, never have to calculate whether I could afford something. My grandmother's letter had been explicit. I'd earned this money through courage, through breaking free, through refusing to accept their abuse. Harold Weinstein had made it clear there were no strings attached beyond the single restriction about not giving money to my parents. I could keep every penny, and no one would question it. After 36 years of being used and discarded, after losing $80,000 to theft, after months of legal warfare and public humiliation, didn't I deserve to simply take care of myself? Margaret said exactly that when I told her about the inheritance over coffee. Take the money, Allison. Keep it all. Invest it conservatively and let it grow. Use it to build the life you actually want instead of the life you had to settle for. You've earned this through pain, and there's no virtue in denying yourself comfort after everything you've been through. Your grandmother wanted you to have it. Accept the gift. But something in my grandmother's letter kept nagging at me, a line I couldn't stop rereading. Use this money to build something better. Not use this money to make yourself comfortable. Or use this money however you want. Build something better. Break the cycle. Make something good from all this pain. On the 4th day, I called Emma and asked her to meet me for lunch. It was our first time seeing each other since her testimony in court. And when she walked into the restaurant, I was shocked by how different she looked. She'd lost weight, her face drawn and older than her 28 years. She sat down across from me with the careful movements of someone who wasn't sure of her welcome. Before we ordered, before any small talk could fill the space between us, I pulled an envelope from my purse and slid it across the table. Emma looked at it confused, then opened it to find a check for $8,000. What is this? It's the money you tried to save to repay me. Ryan told me about it. I don't need your money, Emma, but I need to know something before we go any further. I kept my voice gentle but firm. Are you really done with them? Or are you going to keep enabling them the moment they ask? Emma's eyes filled with tears immediately. I haven't spoken to them since the trial. Ryan told me I had to choose, that he couldn't stay married to me if I kept letting them manipulate me. We're in therapy twice a week. I'm trying to understand how I became someone who'd betray her sister for a wedding. I'm trying to become someone different than they made me. I nodded slowly, watching her face for signs of the old Emma, the one who'd choose compliance over courage. What I saw instead was exhaustion, and something that looked like genuine commitment to change. Then I want to tell you something. Grandma Dorothy left money in a trust. A lot of money. It was released to me because I sued them. $485,000. Emma's face went white. She set down the envelope with shaking hands. Grandma always saw what they did to you. She saw it and I didn't, or I saw it and pretended I didn't because it was easier. There was no bitterness in her voice, just sad recognition. She chose you because you were strong enough to break free. She chose me because she knew I'd use it the right way, I said. And I know what that is now. I'm starting a foundation. I'm calling it the Second Daughters Foundation. It'll provide financial assistance and legal support to women who've been exploited by their families, women whose siblings were favored, women whose parents stole from them, women who were parentified as children and spent their childhoods raising their siblings, women like us, Emma. Emma stared at me, processing. You're giving away $500,000. I'm investing it in breaking the cycle that broke us. That's what Grandma wanted. That's what build something better means. I leaned forward. But I need something from you. I need you to work with me on this. I need you to share your story, to help run support groups, to make sure other Emmas see what complicity costs before they make the choices you made. Can you do that? Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face now. Yes. God, yes. I need to do something that matters. I need to become someone who would have chosen differently. 2 days later, I sat in Harold Weinstein's office with paperwork spread across his conference table. He'd listened to my plan with the careful attention of someone who'd heard many unusual requests over his career, but I could see surprise in his expression. You're refusing the personal inheritance entirely, he said, wanting to make sure he understood correctly. You want the full $485,000 donated to establish this foundation as a nonprofit entity. Yes. My grandmother wanted me to break the cycle she started. This is how I do that. Not by making myself rich, but by making sure other women have the resources to escape what she trapped her son in, what he trapped me in. The money becomes seed funding for something that outlasts all of us. Harold smiled slightly, the first real emotion I'd seen from him. Your grandmother would be proud. She'd also probably say she knew you'd do this. Nah. I signed the paperwork that transformed my inheritance into a foundation, into a tool for breaking cycles, instead of continuing them into something larger than my own pain or comfort. Walking out of Harold's office, I felt something I hadn't felt in the 2 weeks since winning the settlement purpose. Revenge would have been keeping the money. Justice was giving it purpose. 1 year after the settlement, the Second Daughters Foundation held its official launch event in a modest conference room I'd rented at the community center. 30 people attended, mostly women who'd seen the announcement online or heard about it through word of mouth. I stood at a podium that felt too tall and explained what we were building: a nonprofit dedicated to providing legal fee assistance up to $15,000 per case for women suing family members for financial abuse. Along with the legal support, we'd offer access to therapists who understood family trauma and financial literacy workshops to help women rebuild after exploitation. I'd used my finance background to structure the foundation efficiently, keeping overhead costs minimal so that the maximum amount of money went directly to helping women. Linda Sawyer, who'd failed to protect me at 8 but had shown up to protect me at 36, joined the board of directors. Margaret agreed to mentor me on nonprofit management, teaching me how to navigate grant applications and donor relations. And Emma, who'd spent a year in therapy learning to face what she'd done, became our intake coordinator, the first voice women heard when they called asking for help. Our first year was modest by any measure. 23 women received assistance. Some were daughters whose parents had stolen inheritances. Others were sisters who'd funded family businesses only to be cut out. A few were women who'd been parentified as children and were finally setting boundaries with families who saw them only as resources. Each case was different in its details, but the same in its core: women who'd been taught that love meant sacrifice, that family meant compliance, that speaking up meant being selfish. Emma handled intake calls from our small office space, a converted bedroom in a building downtown that we rented for $500 a month. I worked there 2 evenings a week after my regular job, and Emma worked 4 full days. Linda volunteered 10 hours a week reviewing cases. We were small and scrappy, and determined 3 women who understood firsthand what it meant to be exploited by people who were supposed to love you. Then a journalist from a regional magazine called. She'd seen the town hall video that had gone viral a year earlier, had followed the lawsuit, and wanted to know what I'd done with the settlement money. When I told her about the foundation, about my grandmother's inheritance, and how I'd used it, she asked if she could write a feature. The article ran 3 months into our second year with the headline, "From Wedding Betrayal to Women's Advocacy, How One Woman Turned $80,000 of Pain into Purpose." The story went viral in ways I hadn't anticipated. Women shared it with comments like, "This is my story too," and "I wish this had existed when I needed it." Donations started arriving, small amounts, mostly $20 here, $50 there, from women who saw their own experiences reflected in mine. Within 2 months, we'd raised an additional $40,000. I was invited to speak on 3 different podcasts at a women's leadership conference and on a local morning news show. Every time I told my story publicly, I said the same thing. The truth I'd come to understand: I'm not special. I'm not uniquely strong or brave. I just refused to disappear. I refused to let them erase me without consequences. And if me telling my story helps even one woman realize she doesn't have to accept abuse from family, that she's allowed to protect herself even if it means losing people who never really loved her anyway, then what happened to me mattered for something beyond just my pain. I became somehow a voice for women who'd spent their lives being invisible. The forgotten daughters, the scapegoated siblings, the ones whose abuse was financial and emotional rather than physical, the kind that leaves no visible scars but damages just as deeply. Women wrote to me saying they'd finally found words for experiences they'd never been able to name. By the end of our second year, we'd helped 67 women and expanded our services to include support groups. Emma designed and led one specifically for siblings who'd been complicit in family abuse, calling it Siblings of Golden Children. I sat in on the first session, watching from the back of the room as Emma stood in front of 8 women and shared her story with a rawness that made my chest tight. I didn't know I had a choice until my sister showed me I did. Emma told them, her voice steady, despite the tears on her face. I thought keeping peace meant staying silent. I thought being a good daughter and good sister meant going along with whatever my parents wanted, even when I knew it was wrong. I learned that silence isn't peace. Silence is just cowardice. We dress up as love because it sounds better. The women in the group cried, several of them nodding recognition. One woman, younger than Emma, maybe 25, said, "I've never heard anyone else describe it that way. I thought I was the only one who felt like this." Emma reached out and squeezed her hand. "You're not alone. None of us are alone anymore. That's why we're here." I watched Emma facilitate that group with skill I hadn't known she possessed, and I realized she'd finally found her purpose. Not to be loved by everyone, not to be the pretty one or the sweet one, but to help other people understand what complicity costs, and to choose courage before it was too late. She'd become someone who would never again stand silently by while someone was hurt, and that transformation was worth more than any apology she could have given me. Walking out of that support group session, I thought about my grandmother's letter, about her instruction to break the cycle and build something better. We'd taken a lie, a theft, a betrayal, and we'd turned it into a foundation that was helping dozens of women find their voices and their freedom. Emma wasn't the person who'd let our parents steal from me anymore. I wasn't the person who'd believed $80,000 could buy love anymore. We built a legacy from a lie, and it saved more than just us. 2 years after launching the foundation, I received an email that changed everything. A national women's advocacy organization had been following our work and wanted to offer a grant of $250,000 to expand our services beyond the local region. The grant came with one requirement: we had to scale up, hire professional staff, and create infrastructure that could serve women across the country. Within 3 months, I'd hired 3 case managers, a licensed therapist who specialized in family trauma, and an administrative assistant to handle the overwhelming volume of inquiries we were receiving. We moved into a real office space with multiple rooms and launched a national hotline where women could call anonymously to discuss whether what they were experiencing constituted financial abuse. The response was staggering. Over 300 calls came in during the first month alone, women from every state, every background, every age group. I listened to recordings of some of the calls with permission, and the stories were all variations on the same devastating theme. A mother who'd drained her daughter's college fund to pay for the son's wedding. Parents who'd opened credit cards in their children's names and destroyed their credit before they turned 21. Siblings who'd convinced elderly parents to change their wills, cutting out the children who'd actually provided care. Adult children valued only for their paychecks, their emotional labor, their willingness to sacrifice everything for family members who gave nothing in return. My story, I realized with terrible clarity, wasn't unique or even unusual. It was endemic, a pattern repeated in families across the country, hidden behind closed doors and excused as private family matters. 6 months into our expansion, I received a call from a state legislator named Victoria Ramos. She'd read about the foundation and wanted to discuss potential legislation. We met in her office and she explained her vision, a law requiring written agreements for any family member contributing more than $10,000 to another family member's event or major purchase. It would create legal protection for people in situations like mine, making verbal promises legally unenforceable and providing a clear framework for recovering funds if agreements were violated. "Would you be willing to testify in support of this bill?" she asked. "Your story is powerful, and the committee needs to hear from someone who's lived this." 3 weeks later, I sat before a legislative committee in a hearing room packed with people, some supporting the bill, others opposing it on grounds that government shouldn't interfere in family matters. I'd prepared written testimony, but when my turn came to speak, I looked at the legislators and spoke from something deeper than preparation. "I'm not asking you to regulate love," I said, my voice steady in the quiet room. "I'm asking you to provide tools that protect people whose love is exploited. When someone offers money to help family, they're operating from trust and affection. But when that trust is violated, when that money is stolen or misused, victims currently have almost no legal recourse because family dynamics make everything murky. This bill doesn't create suspicion between family members. It creates clarity. It protects the generous from the predatory." The bill passed unanimously 2 months later. The media nicknamed it Allison's Law, though its official title was the Family Financial Protection Act. I felt strange seeing my name attached to legislation, but mostly I felt that what had happened to me might prevent the same thing from happening to others. Through Emma, who maintained minimal contact with our parents out of necessity for legal matters related to their bankruptcy, I learned they followed every development of the foundation obsessively. They lived in a small apartment now, both working part-time jobs at places that would hire people in their late 60s with damaged reputations. Emma reported this information neutrally without editorializing during one of our monthly dinners. "Dad reads every article written about you," she said, pushing pasta around her plate. "Mom watches videos of your speaking engagements. They never say anything directly, but I think they're haunted by what they see, what you've become. What they could have had if they'd just treated you like you mattered." I waited for some feeling to surface, some vindication or pity or anger. Nothing came. My parents had become strangers to me, people whose DNA I happened to share but who had no real place in my life or my thoughts. They were characters in a story I'd moved past, relevant only as the catalyst for something better. "Do you think they're proud?" Emma asked quietly. "I think they're watching someone they threw away become more successful and respected than they ever were," I said. "I don't know what they feel about that, and I've stopped caring." Emma nodded, understanding. We'd both reached the same place through different paths, the place where our parents simply didn't matter anymore. They created a victim. I became an advocate. That was the difference. 3 years after the trial, my phone rang at 11 at night. I was already in bed reading a foundation grant proposal, and I almost didn't answer when I saw Emma's name. Late-night calls never brought good news. "It's Mom," Emma said, her voice thick with crying. She's been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's. They did a full evaluation after Dad noticed she couldn't remember conversations from the same day, couldn't find her way home from the grocery store. The neurologist says she's probably had symptoms for years, maybe 5 or 6 years. Probably even before my wedding. My first response came out cold and immediate. Alzheimer's doesn't make you steal $80,000 and lie about it. It doesn't make you exclude your daughter from a wedding you paid for with her money. I know, Emma said quickly. That's what I said too, but Dad told me her personality started changing about 5 years ago. She became paranoid, suspicious, obsessed with money in a way she hadn't been before. She'd make impulsive decisions and then couldn't explain why. The doctor said early-stage Alzheimer's can affect the parts of the brain that handle judgment and moral reasoning before it affects memory. I sat in the dark of my bedroom holding the phone, not knowing what to do with this information. Part of me wanted to say it didn't matter that a disease didn't excuse cruelty. But another part of me, smaller and quieter, wondered how much of what my mother had done was choice, and how much was her brain literally deteriorating, eroding the thin controls that had kept her worst impulses in check. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I thought you should know. And because she's in a memory care facility now. She keeps asking for you." "Well, she keeps asking for my daughter who left. And I think she means you, but she can't remember your name half the time." Emma's voice broke. "You don't have to come see her. I'd understand if you didn't. But I wanted you to know the option exists." I told Emma I'd think about it, and for 2 weeks I did nothing but think about it. Then, against every instinct telling me to stay away, I agreed to visit. Emma picked me up on a Saturday morning, and we drove in near silence to the memory care facility on the outskirts of town, a place designed to look cheerful with its bright colors and garden courtyard. But that still felt like what it was, a place where people went to slowly disappear. My mother sat in a chair by a window staring out at a bird feeder. She'd aged dramatically, her face deeply lined, her hair completely white now and cut short for easy maintenance. She looked 80 instead of 68. When we approached, she looked up with vacant confusion, her eyes moving from Emma to me and finding no recognition. Then something shifted in her expression. Her eyes widened and filled with tears. Mother, you came back." I looked at Emma confused, and she whispered, "She thinks you're Grandma Dorothy sometimes. They say Alzheimer's patients often confuse people." I sat down slowly in the chair across from my mother, and she reached out to grab my hand with surprising strength. "Mother, I need to tell you something. I need to tell you what I did." Patricia started talking in a rush, the words tumbling out like a confession she'd been holding for years. "I'm sorry I was so hard on Allison. I know you're disappointed in me. I treated her the way you treated me, like nothing she did was ever good enough. I knew it was wrong even while I was doing it, but I couldn't stop. There was this voice in my head saying, 'Make her earn it, make her prove she deserves love,' and I recognized that voice. It was yours. It was what you taught me." I sat frozen, listening to my mother confess to her dead mother through me. She cried as she talked, describing the drowning feeling of the failing business, the mounting debts, the terror of losing the house. We saw how successful Allison was, and we just took from her. We felt like she owed us for raising her, for everything we'd given her. We couldn't admit we'd failed at everything, so we stole from the daughter who'd succeeded. And I knew it was wrong. I knew it was exactly what you did to me, taking from me emotionally what I couldn't give, but I did it anyway." Her voice dropped to something almost childlike. "Emma was easier to love. She needed us. But Allison never needed anyone, and that terrified me. She was going to leave eventually, I knew that, so I pushed her away first before she could choose to go. At least that way I could tell myself I was in control of it." I watched my mother's face as she spoke, seeing in her features an echo of the grandmother I barely remembered, understanding suddenly that the cruelty I'd experienced hadn't started with my mother. It had been passed down like a genetic disease, each generation infecting the next. Then Patricia's eyes focused on my face more clearly. Something like clarity returned. She looked confused, then terrified. "You're not my mother. You're Allison. You're my daughter. Oh God, I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so... The clarity vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Her expression went blank again, and she looked back out the window as if neither Emma nor I were there. I stood up on shaking legs and walked out of the room down the cheerful hallway with its memory care unit decorations and out to the parking lot where I stood gulping air like I'd been underwater. Emma followed but didn't speak, just stood next to me while I processed what had happened. I'd learned where the cruelty came from. I'd seen the chain of trauma stretching back through generations, my grandmother to my mother to me. Understanding didn't undo the damage. It didn't erase the theft or the lies or the erasure, but it did something I hadn't expected. I learned where the cruelty came from. It didn't make me forgive her, but it made me stop hating her. I'd been seeing Dr. Okafor for 2 years, working through the layers of family trauma with the methodical patience she brought to every session. But the week after visiting my mother in the memory care facility, I sat in her office, unable to articulate what I was feeling. The neat categories I'd constructed, villain and victim, abuser and abused, had become blurred and complicated in ways I didn't know how to process. Dr. Okafor listened to me describe the visit, the confusion of my mother thinking I was her own mother, the confession that poured out about cycles of cruelty passed down through generations. When I finished, she leaned forward slightly and asked a question that felt impossibly difficult. Can you hold two truths at once, that your mother hurt you terribly and that she was also hurt terribly, that she made choices and that those choices were shaped by her own trauma? I felt resistance rise immediately. If I acknowledge her pain, doesn't that excuse what she did to me? Doesn't it mean I have to forgive her or accept what happened? No, Dr. Okafor said firmly. Understanding isn't forgiveness. They're completely separate things. You can understand why someone broke you without absolving them of responsibility for the breaking. Your mother's pain explains her behavior. It provides context. But it doesn't justify, it doesn't make it acceptable, doesn't erase the damage she caused. She paused, making sure I was following. You can have compassion for what made her cruel without accepting her cruelty. You can acknowledge that she was a victim of her own mother, without pretending that makes you any less a victim of her. I sat with that for a long moment, feeling something shift in my chest. So I can understand her and still hold her accountable? Yes. In fact, understanding often makes accountability clearer, not murkier. You can see exactly how the damage happened and still insist it shouldn't have. Emma called me 3 days later asking if I'd consider visiting Mom regularly, maybe once a month. She won't remember you next time, Emma said. The disease is progressing, but maybe it would help you to see her to have some kind of relationship before it's too late. I thought about it carefully, weighing what I owed my mother against what I owed myself. Finally, I told Emma, I'll visit once more, just once, to say what I need to say. But I'm not going to become her caretaker or try to build a relationship with someone who doesn't remember who I am. I'm not going to chase an apology she can't give or wait for her to suddenly become the mother I needed. I'm visiting for me, not for her. 2 weeks later, I returned to the memory care facility alone. The nurse told me my mother was having what they called a good day, more lucid than usual, though she cautioned that clarity could vanish at any moment. I found Patricia in the same chair by the window, and this time when I sat down, she looked at me with recognition. Allison, she said, and her voice broke on my name. Hi, Mom. I kept my tone neutral calm. I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it while you can still understand. She nodded, tears already forming. What you did hurt me in ways I'm still healing from. The stealing, the lying, the exclusion from Emma's wedding, all of it. You damaged me, and that damage doesn't disappear just because you're sick now. I paused, making sure she was still with me. But I also know you were hurt too. I know Grandma Dorothy did to you what you did to me. I know you were drowning and made terrible choices because you didn't know how to ask for help without feeling like a failure. Patricia's hands trembled in her lap. I can't forgive you. Not yet, maybe not ever. That's not where I am, and I don't know if I'll get there. But I'm working on understanding you. I'm working on seeing you as a whole person who was both a victim and an abuser, because apparently both of those things can be true at once." My voice steadied. "And I want you to know that I'm choosing to stop the cycle you couldn't stop. I won't pass this pain to anyone else. I'm breaking what you couldn't break, and maybe that's the only gift either of us can give to each other." My mother reached for my hand, squeezed it once, and whispered, "Thank you." Then the clarity began to fade from her eyes, and she looked out the window again, somewhere else entirely. I left the facility and drove without thinking to the cemetery where my grandmother Dorothy was buried. I hadn't visited her grave since the funeral 15 years ago. It took me 20 minutes to find the right section, the right row, the simple headstone with her name and dates. I stood there looking at it for a long time before I spoke. "I understand now why you wrote that letter," I said to the stone, to the ground, to whatever remained of the woman who'd started this cycle. You knew you'd broken your son and he'd broken me, and it would keep going unless someone stopped it. You chose me to stop it, and I think you chose right. You knew I was strong enough even if you never told me while you were alive." I placed flowers I'd bought from a grocery store on the grave, simple daisies that felt appropriate. "I forgive you, Grandma. Not because what you did was okay. It wasn't okay, and it rippled through generations and hurt people who never even knew you. But I forgive you because you tried to make it right before you died. You saw the pattern and tried to break it the only way you knew how. That's more than Mom did. That's more than a lot of people do." Walking back to my car through the quiet cemetery, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. Not closure exactly, not the neat ending where everything is resolved and everyone is healed, but something simpler and more real: freedom. Freedom from needing my mother to apologize or my father to acknowledge what he'd done. Freedom from requiring my family to validate my pain or admit their crimes. Freedom from carrying their judgment, their expectations, their conditional love. Some cycles end with forgiveness. Some end with understanding. Mine ended with freedom. 4 years after my sister's wedding, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived at my office with the state seal embossed on the back. Inside was a formal letter informing me I'd been selected as Woman of the Year by the State Women's Advocacy Coalition. The award ceremony would take place at the state capitol in 6 weeks, with an expected 300 attendees, including state legislators, nonprofit leaders, journalists, and other advocates. My first instinct was to decline. I'd never been comfortable being the center of attention, had spent most of my life trying to be invisible. But Margaret wouldn't hear of it. "Your story gives other women permission to stand up," she said over coffee when I showed her the letter. "When you talk about what happened to you, you're not just telling your story. You're giving voice to thousands of women who've experienced the same thing but didn't have the resources or courage to fight back. You have to go. You have to accept this." So I went. The night of the ceremony, I sat backstage in a simple black dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, listening to the hum of 300 people taking their seats in the auditorium. My hands were cold despite the warmth of the building, and I kept checking my phone for distraction. That's when Emma's text came through. "Dad is in the audience, row 12. He wanted to see you receive this. I'm so sorry. Don't let it ruin your night." My heart started racing immediately, that old familiar panic response that I'd thought I'd moved past. My father was here sitting in this audience watching me receive an award for work that had grown directly from his cruelty. For a moment I considered leaving, walking out the back exit, and driving home, letting someone else accept the award on my behalf. But then I took a breath and made a decision. His presence didn't get to matter anymore. He'd taken enough from me. He wouldn't take this. When my name was called, I walked onto the stage to applause that rose into a standing ovation. The presenter, a woman who headed a statewide domestic violence coalition, stood at the podium describing my work in terms that felt simultaneously accurate and surreal. In 4 years, the Second Daughters Foundation has helped 187 women escape financial abuse by family members, provided over $2 million in legal assistance, and inspired legislation in 3 states, including our own Family Financial Protection Act. Allison Pierce has transformed personal tragedy into systemic change, and we are honored to recognize her work tonight. I took the microphone with shaking hands, looking out at 300 faces, most of them strangers, some of them legislators. I'd testified before a few foundation donors I recognized, and in row 12, smaller and older than I remembered, sat my father. He looked diminished somehow, his shoulders curved inward, his face lined with age and what might have been shame. I began speaking, my voice steadier than I expected. This award has my name on it, but it represents every woman who was told she was difficult when she was just inconvenient. Every daughter who gave everything and was still told it wasn't enough. Every sister who was erased because she didn't fit the story her family wanted to tell. I paused, looking directly at row 12. There's someone here tonight who taught me everything I know about survival, not because he loved me, but because he didn't. The audience reacted audibly, gasps and murmurs spreading through the room. Some people looked around, trying to identify who I was talking about. But I kept my eyes on my father, watching his face as I spoke. My father taught me that family isn't always safe, that love can be conditional, that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from, that you can do everything right and still be disposable in the eyes of people whose approval you've been chasing your entire life. My voice didn't waver. And in teaching me those painful lessons, he accidentally taught me something more important, that I didn't need his approval to matter. I didn't need his love to be worthy. I needed my own. I watched my father stand up slowly. He began walking toward the aisle, and for a moment the entire auditorium seemed to hold its breath. I didn't stop speaking. He's leaving now. That's okay. He left a long time ago. I just didn't realize it until I stopped chasing him, until I stopped believing that if I was just good enough, accomplished enough, generous enough, he might finally see me as worthy of love. My father reached the end of the row and stepped into the aisle. He didn't turn around, didn't look back at the stage, but I saw his shoulders shaking. He stood there for just a moment, frozen between staying and leaving, and then he walked through the exit doors. They closed behind him with a soft click that somehow carried through the silent auditorium. I continued, my voice firm now. This award isn't about revenge. Revenge would have been becoming bitter and small, letting what they did to me define who I became. This award is about transformation. It's about every person who looked at their worst moment and decided it wouldn't be their last moment. It's about turning pain into purpose, wounds into wisdom, betrayal into a calling to protect others. I looked out at the audience, at the women and men watching me with expressions ranging from tears to fierce pride. To everyone here who's survived family abuse, who's been scapegoated or exploited, or told your pain doesn't matter because it's just family, I see you. Your pain is real, your anger is justified, and you deserve better than what you were given. Thank you for this incredible honor. The applause that followed was thunderous. People stood and some were crying, and I stood on that stage holding an award with my name on it for work my father's cruelty had made necessary. The irony wasn't lost on me. Neither was the symbolism of him walking out before I finished speaking, unable to witness my complete triumph, because witnessing it would mean acknowledging his complete failure. He came to see me honored. He left knowing he'd created his own absence. 1 week after the award ceremony, I did something I'd never done before. I invited people to my home for dinner. Not my apartment or condo, which had always felt too small, too plain, not quite nice enough for entertaining. But the small house I'd bought 6 months earlier with money from the foundation salary I'd finally allowed myself to take. It wasn't fancy, just a 2-bedroom with a deck and a kitchen that actually fit a dining table. But it was mine, and for the first time I felt like it was enough. The guests were small in number but large in meaning. Emma and Ryan Margaret Linda Sawyer, Dr. Okafor, and 3 women from the foundation's first year who'd stayed in touch and become friends. I made pasta, bought good wine, lit candles on the table. Nothing elaborate, nothing meant to impress. Just food and warmth and people who'd chosen to be there. As we ate, stories flowed naturally. Emma announced she'd been accepted into a social work master's program starting in the fall. Linda shared that she was finally retiring from her current position, but would continue serving on the foundation's board. Margaret raised her glass and said, "To Allison, who taught me that even mentors have more to learn. You've shown me what transformation actually looks like." We toasted, and I felt something I'd rarely experienced, belonging without having to earn it. After dinner, Emma and I stepped out onto the deck while others lingered over dessert inside. The evening air was cool and city lights sparkled in the distance. Emma leaned against the railing and asked quietly, "Do you ever regret how it all went down? The lawsuit, the publicity, all of it?" I thought about her question carefully, watching the lights. I regret that it was necessary. I wish they'd been different people, people who could love us without conditions. But I don't regret that I did it. I lost parents I never really had. I gained myself. Emma nodded slowly. I lost the version of them I thought I needed, but I gained a sister I actually have. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Emma said, her voice uncertain, "Ryan and I are talking about having kids, and I'm terrified I'll repeat the pattern. That I'll favor one over the other without meaning to, that I'll damage them the way we were damaged." I took her hand and squeezed it. "You won't, because you're aware of it. Awareness is what breaks cycles. Grandma broke it enough for you to see it existed. I broke it enough to stop it from continuing. You'll break it by building something completely different." Later, after everyone had left and I'd cleaned up the dishes, I sat on my couch with a glass of wine and looked at the Woman of the Year plaque propped on my bookshelf. I thought about the girl I'd been at 8 years old, already convinced she had to earn love through usefulness. The teenager who'd paid her own way through everything while her sister was funded. The woman who'd offered $80,000 thinking it would finally make her matter to people incapable of seeing her value. I picked up my phone and opened a note I'd been adding to over the past year. Things I wished I could tell that younger version of myself. Things I know now. It was titled. I read through the list. Family is supposed to be a safe place, and if it's not, you're allowed to leave. Protecting your peace isn't selfish, it's survival. The people who call you difficult are often the ones who benefited from your compliance. Justice is expensive, but silence costs more. I saved the note and set down my phone. Tomorrow, the foundation had 5 new intake calls scheduled. Tomorrow, I'd help other daughters find their voices and their courage. But tonight, sitting in my own home, surrounded by evidence of the life I'd built from ruins, I was simply enough. Not because I'd achieved something or proven something or earned something, just because I existed and I'd finally learned that was sufficient. I stood and walked to the window, seeing my reflection against the dark glass. I raised my wine glass to that reflection, to the woman looking back at me with clear eyes and a peaceful expression. To the sister they tried to erase, I said softly to my reflection. To the woman I became instead. To every second daughter who refused to disappear. We're still here. And we're not silent anymore. I took a sip of wine and smiled at my own face in the glass at the evidence of survival and transformation written in every line and shadow. My sister's wedding was never canceled, but my family's hold on me was, and that was the best gift I ever gave myself. Thank you so much for staying with me through Allison's entire journey, from that devastating moment when she discovered the betrayal to her ultimate triumph as an advocate who turned pain into purpose. This story proves that sometimes the family we're born into isn't our real family, and that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. If Allison's story resonated with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family or been taken advantage of by people who were supposed to love you, I want you to know you're not alone. Please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because I share stories like this every week. Stories about people who refused to stay victims and chose to become survivors instead. And I really want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members? Do you think Allison made the right choice? Or should she have handled things differently? What would you have done in her situation? Your perspective matters, And this community is built on supporting each other through these difficult conversations. Drop your thoughts below, hit that like button if this story moved you, and I'll see you in the next one.